Yep, that's us now live.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the inquiry into the proposed wind farm, Rigghill wind farm near Skelmerley. My name's David Little and I'm the reporter appointed for this case. I won't go over the formalities of yesterday. It's all the same people. We've all introduced yourself. We know what we're doing, I think. So today we're going to be hearing from Historic Environment Scotland's witnesses. Firstly, Mrs. Cameron, who I can see there. Good morning. So unless there's any procedural points to raise, I'll just pass over straight to Mr. Milne. Thank you very much.
Just the one from me. So it's to make sure that you had got the email with the visualization.
I haven't seen that yet, but I think Jane is working today, so I'd expect her. She'll pass me that along to me today, so I'll look at it at some point.
Right, we sent that through last night, so hopefully that will wing its way to you.
Yeah, I should have it to look at today during the course of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Milne.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. The first witness for Historic Environment Scotland is Miss Ruth Cameron. Now, if I may mention, Miss Cameron is self-isolating at the moment, having recently tested positive for COVID. She doesn't mind me mentioning that, but I say it because if Miss Cameron has a coughing fit or would like a break, then either of us may make that request in order to keep things as comfortable as possible. And with that in mind, Ms. Cameron has asked if we could dispense with the reading of her summary precognition because it's quite a lot of text to read out in one go. So if I may go straight into just a couple of questions. Good morning, Ms. Cameron.
Good morning.
The first thing I would like to do is refer you to the documents, which people should please have to hand. Your report on precognition. Dr. Carter's report is Appendix 3 and precognition. Document number 19, Scottish Planning Policy. Document 28, the 2016 Managing Change Setting Guidance. 79, the Statement of Agreed Matters. And 29, the SNH HES EIA Handbook. Thank you. So, Ms. Cameron, we heard quite a bit yesterday about the concept of integrity of setting, and a discussion took place about perceived differences between the definition which you set out in your report and the definition in the Statement of Agreed Matters. Now, we can go to either of both of those if that would help, but I would just invite you, please, to really respond to what Dr. Carter said yesterday and which he touched on in his precognition at 4.2, where he asked, where basically Dr. Carter said that the position set out in your report is materially different to that agreed in the Statement of Agreed Matters. Would you accept that there's that material difference?
I do not accept that there's a material difference, but I would caveat by saying that the two statements are not doing the same thing. They are taking the same approach to assessing integrity of setting. But it might be helpful if I just read the paragraph of my report that's relevant, which is paragraph 48, which says, HES accordingly considered that in order to maintain the integrity of a monument setting, the factors that contribute to its cultural significance must be retained so that the ability to understand, appreciate and experience the monument is not diminished. Now, obviously, a lot of the words of that, as Dr. Carter pointed out, are very similar to the words that are in the Statement of Agreed Matters, but I'll just draw attention to the opening there. In order to maintain the integrity of a monument setting. So I would say that this is not a formulation that is intended to set a bar for where there is an adverse impact on integrity of setting. It's setting out an approach to considering integrity of setting, and that approach is to focus on the factors that contribute to cultural significance and then to consider what the level of impact has been on understanding, appreciation, and experience. In the Statement of Agreed Matters, that same approach is being applied, but a bar is being set for adequate retention. I would argue that using the definition at 48 of my report, if you adequately maintain the integrity of setting, then you will be avoiding any adverse effect on integrity of setting. And I think that that is how the relationship between those two statements, yes, they're not the same as one another because they are not doing the same thing and they're not formulated in the same way. I would also go on to say, and I hope that this is helpful, that I think that the reason that we came at it in this way, I think that HES's approach was influenced by the fact that we knew that there was a difference of professional judgment here about the level of impact. And on that basis, what we were focused on was agreeing an approach to how to understand and explain impacts on integrity of setting, rather than agreeing the bar for an unacceptable impact, because we knew that there was already a difference of opinion in that matter.
Is it Historic Environment Scotland's position that no change to the setting of an asset should be allowed?
No. We're very clear that only impacts on integrity of setting are contrary to policy, and we would consider that to be a high bar, and I hope that that is evidenced by the fact that we do not object to very much wind development, and we relatively rarely find ourselves in the current situation. Of the objections that we put in, also a very high percentage of those are handled before this stage, because normally, or sorry, I shouldn't say normally, frequently when we object, we're able to offer suggestions of mitigation or redesign, and unfortunately that wasn't the instance in this case. So in that regard, for us, this is a very unusual case in that we've identified a level of impact at that is at an extent where we can't see any way to reduce it to being acceptable for our interests.
Staying with this concept of setting or integrity of setting, you heard yesterday some discussion about Scottish planning policy in paragraph 145, and it might help to have document 19 in front of you, and that specific paragraph, page 39 of the PDF.
I have it.
Now, my first question in this respect is, if I noted Dr. Carter correctly yesterday, he referred to moving away from setting as being a standalone topic. This took place in the context of the discussion around cultural significance. What's your response to that suggestion?
I would say that I understand integrity of setting to be the contribution that setting makes to cultural significance. So therefore, it is innately tied to the concept of cultural significance and not a separate consideration. However, I would also say that paragraph 145, and I believe this was discussed and explored yesterday, has two arms. And one of them is adverse effect on a scheduled monument, and the other is on integrity of setting. That puts a specific consideration on impacts on integrity of setting in isolation from other impacts on the scheduled monument, which I would take to be impacts on fabric or perhaps intrinsic characteristics in most instances. I would say, therefore, that when we're considering impacts on integrity of setting, what we have to do is consider only the elements of cultural significance that are coming from setting, the factors of setting that contribute to cultural significance.
Thank you. The role of experience in the context of understanding and appreciation was also discussed. I wonder if I could please take you to the setting guidance from 2016, document number 28. And could you please take us to the definition of setting?
So this is found on, if you're on the PDF, page 6, under the heading 1, what is setting? And it says, setting is the way the surroundings of a historic asset or place contribute to how it is understood, appreciated, and experienced.
Do you happen to know if that definition, specifically the use of the word experienced, was reflected in the 2010 guidance?
I believe it was.
What's your view on the role of experience in the context of how an asset is understood and appreciated?
First and foremost, I think I would say, again, that I agree with Dr. Carter that experience is crucial, in that experience is the only thing that you can access by being on the site. You can understand and appreciate factors that contribute to cultural significance without being there, but experience is, in a sense, is what makes it setting. And I think that that is relevant, particularly for this type of development, because I think that that makes it difficult to mitigate impacts on setting if you can't do that through avoidance or reduction, essentially.
So can I'm very sorry to interrupt, but we can probably hear we have an evacuation, a fire alarm in our whole block. So I'm afraid we've just had the fire marshal in and we're going to have to go out.
You better.
As you can probably hear. All right. Well, bye-bye.
On mute, sir.
Okay, yes, right. So the rest of us then, we should just, sorry about this, we can just put our mics and our cameras off and we can just wait to hear back. Thank you.
Thanks.
you hear us?
All is well. Yes, can hear you fine.
All
Just
is
hopefully.
well. Our offices are still intact, which is a good thing.
That is indeed a good thing. Now, we were just saying here, of course, you're probably like us, one of several tenants in an office, and you're not in charge of when the fire alarms are tested.
Yeah, it wasn't a test. It was a genuine.
Oh, really?
It was a false alarm, but it wasn't a test. So, yes, we're in five. There's 5 stories, and we've got. We have 3 floors, so there are 2 floors on this in the office block which are outside of our control. So you don't know what goes on, but no, it was everybody out, but it was clearly not a. It was a false alarm, but wasn't a regular test which happened on a Monday. So there you go. So all I can do is apologise. Thank you very much. It was nothing to do with us, but it was an alarm, but a false alarm. So we are all safe, and the offices are still standing.
I'm glad to hear it. We finished Miss Cameron's evidence while you were away.
That's absolutely fine.
There was nothing you needed to worry about.
No cross-examination. Exactly. That's all good.
Callum, are we back live again in terms of the recording? Or are we okay to start?
Yep. Well, we're still live, so can carry on.
So, sorry if we can remember where we were.
Where I think the notes that we'd got before it became very, very loud. It was the note I'd got was you were talking about the 2010 guidance, 2016 guidance, and Cameron had confirmed that experience was indeed in the 2010 guidance.
I have had the luxury now to check that reference, and it's paragraph 2.1. I think is probably the equivalent section of the 2010 guidance.
In the 2016 guidance, you mean?
Sorry, in the 2010 guidance is paragraph 2.1 that it refers to.
Experience, yeah. And that was where we got to, so I hope that helps.
Okay. Okay, so we noted that point about 2010 and 2016 and experienced. And my next question, which I may or may not have asked, is what your view is on the role of experience in the context of understanding and appreciation.
I think primarily the first thing that I would like to say is that I would agree with the key point that Dr. Carter made yesterday about experience, which is that experience is really tied to being at the asset on the ground. And I think in that sense, it's very important because it's what makes it setting that we're talking about. You can access understanding and appreciation in other ways, but you have to experience setting. And I think that that's particularly relevant when we're looking at options for mitigation, for example. It means that it can be hard to meaningfully mitigate without reducing that impact on setting because of that issue of experience. I would also agree with what Dr. Carter said, that essentially the starting point of understanding setting or engaging with setting is to experience it naturally. And he talked about that then going on to influence understanding and appreciation. And I strongly feel that these 3 terms are quite difficult to separate from one another because they do have big overlaps in meaning. And I think that experience is definitely the starting point for understanding and appreciation. On top of that, I would say that there can be factors of setting that you experience, and that is an end in itself. It doesn't necessarily take you towards understanding or towards appreciation. The examples I would give for that in terms of how I would use the word experience are things like sense of place, sense of remoteness, or there's the specific term in the setting guidance, sensory factors. And to me, sensory factors are something that you would experience rather than appreciate or understand necessarily. I suppose I would just like to sum up that by saying that given that the term experience is in the definition of setting, I would innately therefore expect it to be in the definition of integrity of setting.
There was also some discussion yesterday with reference to the statement of agreed matters and setting guidance 2016, where on page 9 it states that whether or not a site is visited does not change its inherent value or its sensitivity to alterations in its setting. What's your position regarding whether a site is visited affecting ability to understand, appreciate, experience?
I think the setting guidance makes a very clear point about this, that if a site is visited, that might contribute to its cultural significance in terms of the response to it. It can become part of culture. People can have personal relationships with the site and personal reactions to it. It might be part of culture in terms of storytelling or family history or any number of other things. I think the core point for me in this is thinking about making good decisions in the long term, and HEP sets out a clear vision for that and a clear approach to that, and as do the other policy and guidance that we've talked about. And whether a site is currently visited is something that is subject to change. So I would be wary of an assessment or a decision-making process that relied on that fact, because we can't make assumptions about how people will engage with sites or assets in the future.
Thank you. A broad question to end with, just to give you the opportunity to comment on any other aspects of Dr. Carter or Miss Roy's evidence from yesterday.
I think three points probably. The first is that I agree with Lynn Roy's evidence, and as I understand it, the Heritage Interpretation Plan is potentially one of the benefits of the scheme that should be considered, but that benefit is a separate consideration from any adverse impact on integrity of setting. The second is that in this instance, it's my understanding that our assessment of the impact on the integrity of setting of Outerwards Roman Fortlet doesn't particularly rely on impacts on experience. As I said, I would consider experience to be, I would put it as a relevant part of the toolkit when assessing integrity of setting. But in this instance, for this case, if the word experience were not to be in our agreed approach or our agreed definition to integrity of setting, my understanding is that that would be very unlikely to affect our assessment to any meaningful degree. And thirdly, and I suppose just for clarity, ATS has not changed its approach in this case, and the approach to integrity of setting has remained a constant, and we agreed a bar of adequate retention in the statement of agreed matters that I believe was implicit in my report. However, I do think that it benefits from being made explicit.
Thank you, Ms. Cameron. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hardy, are you in a position now to just go across to into cross-examination, or do you want a bit of time?
Yes, no, I'm happy to make a start. I mean, the list of documents is really the same. It's the same documents. Cameron, won't surprise you. Is it Miss?
Ms.
Ms. Cameron. It's the same list, which won't surprise you. If there's anything else, then we can take that separately. It also strikes me, listening to this, there's an awful lot of documentation and an awful lot of work that's gone into the sides cases. There's not actually that much between the sides. I think there are professional judgments to call. So I'm not going to cross-examine you really on matters of sort of discursive things to any great extent. I want to start with this application in your start of evidence in chief, and you've just touched on it again now. That what the statement of agreed matters was doing, and I'm going to suggest for the first time, was setting a bar. So the way you described it in your first set of answers were that the definition that you'd got in paragraph 48 of your report set out an approach, but what the SOAM does is set out a bar. That's right?
It explicitly sets out a bar. I think that the word adequate is, would it be fair to say it almost goes without saying that something ought to be adequate? So I think adequate retention, adequate maintaining, I think, I agree. It's certainly the first explicit bar that has been set out.
Well, I don't accept that it would be common sense or taken as read. And if we could just go to your paragraph 48 of your inquiry report, so that's CD 59.
I have it.
So just reading that together, has accordingly consider that in order to maintain in the integrity of a monument setting, the factors that contribute to its cultural significance must be retained so that the ability to understand, appreciate and experience the monument is not diminished. So in all of these formulations, lots of words, and it depends on where you put the stress, but just picking up on must, the factors that contribute to its cultural significance must be retained. And if you couple that with is not diminished, that's an absolute, isn't it? That's something that you must do. And non-diminution means no difference. You don't denude, you don't take away. That's a fair reading of those words, isn't it?
That's what we're saying must be done in order to maintain the integrity of an asset setting, yes.
Yeah. So that's an absolute. So if you were to take away, if you were to diminish, if you were to denude to any extent, then that would not be done, would it?
Again, this wasn't setting a bar. And I think that in as much as this is putting the point of measurement, I would say I read that as being more around factors being retained. So because it's then saying, and this will mean that understanding, appreciation, and experience is not diminished.
Yeah, it's not really my point, though, is it? So,
sorry, I must have misunderstood your point.
Yeah. So looking at the wording, the must be retained and the not diminished. It's not a straight reading. That doesn't allow of any change, does it? There's a must, there's something that's mandatory, and then there's in order to ensure that something is not diminished. So you can't take away anything. There's no change that can happen if you're to satisfy that approach. That's a fair reading, isn't it, of the words that you've put?
It is a fair reading, and it ties in well with the word maintain.
Yes. So there is then a substantial change, isn't there? Very helpful for that, and very grateful for that answer. There's then a material change when we get to the SOAM, because adequately retained allows for potentially a considerable degree of diminution, reduction, or whatever you want to say, providing enough, the goodness, if you like, enough is retained for you to be able to understand and appreciate and experience cultural significance. That is a marked difference, isn't it, from between paragraph 48 and what's in the SOAM?
It is, because they are doing different things, yes. The two sentences have different aims, and so they are formed separately and differently.
Right, so I'm just putting a note as a marked a marked difference, and the caveat is doing two different things.
I would say that's more than a caveat. Those sentences say different things because they are doing different things.
They say different things, all right? I'm going to put there is a marked difference, though, because one is an absolute, isn't it? We've agreed. So that's a must and not diminished. One is a relative term. That's allows for things to be adequately retained. You have to judge whether or not that adequacy is A, yeah?
I agree.
See-
One sets a bar and the other does not.
Okay, I'm going to use the word absolute against relative. Is that first? The first one's absolute.
No, because the first one doesn't set a bar at all. So it's not saying there's not an absolute bar because there is no bar. So I disagree with that.
Well,
Can I-
we're sort
can I
of been
just-
over that, Mr. Cameron, because the word must be retained and not diminished. They don't allow, do they, for any change?
But
They-
maintained.
I wonder if I can
Sorry.
come in. Sorry, just it might help, because I understand why you're asking about this, Mr. Hardy. I mean, for my purposes, when I'm coming to think about policy paragraph 145 of SPP, it seems to me that what's in 4.4 of the statement of agreed matters helps me apply that test. And it's probably that expression that I would go to rather than the one in Ms. Cameron's inquiry report. I understand why you're asking the question about what the difference is, because I had similar questions. But I guess people might impugn slightly different meanings to what they've written as opposed to what someone else has written. But I don't know whether it helps you, Mr. Hardy, if I say that I think it's probably to what's in the SOM that I'm going to be referring to when I turn my mind to making the policy text.
I absolutely agree, and I was just saying to well, yeah, well, I absolutely agree. And the SOAM is the test that's going to be applied. But the reason for asking those questions, Ms. Cameron, is this: until that you had set the bar in agreeing the definition in the SOAM, you presumably did not have a bar to work towards. You didn't have a yardstick, did you?
I think that Dr. McLeod-Rivet's report sets a bar of real diminution, of substantial loss of adequate retention that I think is very comparable. In fact, I would say is the same. And
So-
sorry.
I don't want to stop you. No? If you finish, then I'll just follow up on that. So the test that you were applying, Hes was applying, was a different test of real diminution. Is that right? Where do I see that?
Paragraph 101 of Dr. McLeod-Rivet's report.
Paragraph 1.
101.
Let's just go there. So read it together. Dr. Carter's discussion of paragraph 145. He argues construction of the proposed wind farm would not lead to loss of our ability to understand the location chosen for the fall at the wider military context in which this decision was made. However, this assertion demonstrates a misunderstanding of the concept of integrity. As discussed above, integrity of setting requires that factors that contribute to a monument's cultural significance must be retained, so that the ability to understand, appreciate, and experience the monument is not diminished. You say that's not a test. As such, an adverse impact on the integrity of setting will occur if the ability to understand, appreciate, and experience the monument is diminished, and it's not necessary to lose the ability to understand the location chosen for the monument in order to constitute an adverse impact on the integrity of setting. The proposed event would lead to a real diminution of the ability to understand, appreciate, and experience the monument in its setting, and therefore the proposed development is unacceptable. So if that's the test, there is a difference, isn't there, between real diminution and adequately retained. It's a higher bar, isn't it?
Sorry, which is the higher bar?
Real diminution. That is a different test, isn't it? There's a material difference between real diminution and adequately retained, which is in the SOAM.
I suppose both are open to interpretation, but I would say real diminution is a very high level of impact, which I would say does not, if something is experiences a real diminution, then it is not adequately retained. I would say, if anything, real diminution is a higher level of impact, as I understand it.
You make submissions about that. The provenance of a test then of real diminution, where does that come from?
I believe it comes from not the idea of being not diminished.
So where would I see any discussion of that, or is there anything to provide some support for its provenance? Is it something that's been, has it found favoured with, perhaps it's not determinative, but with reporters or the ministers?
I'm afraid I couldn't give you chapter and verse, but the idea of diminishing understanding, appreciation, and experience is certainly one that is used frequently, and I believe in the managing change guidance.
No. The test, what we're looking at is how has approached this, and what we're told is that you had an approach. You had an approach, and that was the one that you set out in paragraph 48. You've now set a bar, that's in the sum, that's the one the report is going to use. I put it to you that there was no previous test then, because you just got an approach. You told me that the test was then set out in paragraph 101 of this report. What I've then asked you is, well, where does that come from? What's the provenance of that report? Because you don't see the words real diminution in any of the documents, do you? Where do I mean, an open question, where would I go? Thank you. So that's not something that's been, it's not been discussed, it's not been ventilated, not been decided upon by previous reporters. Is that a line that HES has taken at previous inquiries?
I believe this was just a narrative explanation of the level of impact in this case.
But you tell me that that's the test, because what I'm looking for is the test that's been applied. You see, you've objected to my client's proposal, and I'm just trying to work out why. I don't understand. So is that a test? Could you tell me that's the test? Is that a test that HES has previously used?
It's how we explained the bar, the level of impact in this instance.
Is that the first time? Can I record that that would be the first time that that's been done?
I'm afraid I do not know.
But if I was to say to put it the other way around, can you take me to any examples of where that's been put forward and discussed? You can't, or there certainly aren't any before this reporter.
I believe not. No, I think this is part of an explanation of how impacts on understanding, appreciation, and experience has been undertaken.
Yeah. So do you say then, let's go back to my point about the sum, do you say that there has been a change from the test as you've just identified it, maybe for the first time, paragraph 101 of this report, to the agreed definition in paragraph 4.4 of the SOAM?
I believe them to be comparable. I consider the bar to be in the same place. If anything, as I say, I think real diminution might identify a higher level of impact.
All right, one can, as I say, make submissions about that. So adequately retained, that means that quite a high degree, potentially a high degree of change can be accommodated without triggering that policy threshold, doesn't it? It means enough, sufficient. You've got enough left.
I agree.
Yeah. So it isn't a sort of tripwire that's triggered very, very sensitively. Actually, you can have fair degree of change before that policy tripwire is triggered. Yeah.
I agree. I would say that that's in line with the fact that we rarely object to wind development. So I think that probably does reflect how we would normally approach this. Yes.
Yeah, of course, that doesn't make it right. I know you're objecting here. You've made that relative point, but of course you also lose inquiries, and it doesn't mean to say you're right here. It doesn't take you so far with respect. I wonder working that through. If we could have a look at a case example or two. Now, obviously, cases are got to be taken on their merits, and there's all of that usual caveat stuff. But I want to look at the Cregan decision, if we may. That's in the core documents at CD 72, I think it is. Do you have that?
Thank you. I have it.
So we've got the, certainly in the hard copy that I've got the report. We'll come back to that in due course. And then we've got the reporter's conclusions in relation to cultural heritage at paragraph 4.31 onwards. Do you have that?
Thank you. I do.
And so we reviewed all the evidence. The most pertinent points summarised above. Satisfies appropriate for our assessment. Clear disagreement among the parties, 432. And then you get to the bottom of page 68. So pick up 3 paragraphs there, 438. On this basis, we take the view that to assess the acceptability of the impact upon the settings of the Blairy and Andunan scheduled monuments, the effect the development would have upon one's ability to understand and appreciate the assets should be determinative issues in this regard. 439. Where the understanding and appreciation of an asset would be adequately retained, we consider it reasonable to conclude that the integrity of its setting would remain intact, as integrity of setting referred to in SPP at paragraph 145 is not defined elsewhere. Now, we can have there's going to be a discussion about experience, but you can insert experience into there. But with that done, paragraph 439 reflects the SOAM, doesn't it, in general terms?
It does.
Yeah. SPP then, the HES policy statement and historic Scotland setting guidance all imply that a holistic view of the effects upon setting should be adopted. In light of this, we consider the position adopted in the addendum more accurately states the likely predicted effects upon the setting of historic environment assets and conclusions of the reassessment undertaken by Dr. Carter. I read that out to be fair and full. Now, if we turn to the Blairy Dunn asset, so we can see that starts at paragraph 443. And we can see that there is a high magnitude of change, which is in the ES addendum. So 443, predicted potential impact is assessed to be a high magnitude, resulting in an effect of major significance, which is significant in EIA terms. Do you see that?
I do.
But it's also concluded that the overall integrity of the setting would be adversely affected. So you've got the ES saying high magnitude, you've got a major significance. Now, turn to 446, just to give a little bit of background. The function and purpose of the Blairy Dunn is uncertain. Most likely a farmhouse. Council suggested position states it may have served as a defensive function. Having considered all of the evidence, it's not possible to reach the definitive view. Site inspection revealed that Blairy Dunn was positioned in a way that would have provided commanding views of the glen in all directions, suggesting that if it was not built as a fort defensive structure, it was nevertheless located with defensibility in mind. So it's some type of fortified farmhouse by the look of it. Over the page, 447, was struck by the effectiveness of the Dunn's positioning in the glen to offer such extensive views of surrounding land. We agree with the ES and ES addendum that the introduction of the Cregan Wind Farm would have a high magnitude of impact upon the setting of Blairy Dunn, simply by virtue of the significant change to the landscape character and the visual impact of the wind farm. So what the what the reporters were doing was agreeing with high magnitude and major EIA effect, weren't they? Yeah. So then, applying the test of whether the asset setting could still be understood and appreciated, we agree with the applicant that Dunn's setting appears to be principally associated with the immediate surrounding pastoral land, burn and passage through the glen. The effect on 449 on the Dunn's relationship with higher ground would be subject to a significant degree of visual change. But we consider that Blairy Dunn's location in the landscape would still be capable of being understood and appreciated. We consider that wind turbines would very obviously be perceived as contemporary structures. This contrast would enable the host landscape's relationship with Blairy Dunn to be interpreted. So in essence, an observer would be able to clearly understand what the landscape would be like in the absence of the wind turbines. So an appreciation of the Dunn's historical setting in the landscape would still be capable of being appreciated. And on that basis, we find that Cregan would not have a bearing upon the overall integrity of the setting of Blairy Dunn. So there was a finding, wasn't there? An acceptance, actually, of high magnitude of change leading to a major EIA effect, so significant in EIA terms. And it was an asset designed to have commanding views all around. But the views taken by the reporters is that notwithstanding that significant effect and significant effect on commanding views, that would not have an effect on the overall integrity of setting. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
That would be at odds, wouldn't it? That's not a result that you and Hez could compute.
I disagree. I think that we often see assessments that say major effects that don't trigger our objection.
That's slightly different.
Oh, sorry, please explain then.
Well, because you can choose to object for all sorts of reasons. You might not have finance, you may not have the stomach for the fight, all of those things. There are other personnel issues. The question I'm interested in is triggering the integrity of setting test. So,
quite right, yes, sorry.
So what you're saying is that you can have a major EIA effect, so high magnitude of change, in a way that does not trigger or does not breach the integrity of setting test as you see it. That's what Blairy Dunn is doing, isn't it? You've got
it is, yes.
Yeah. And you're now saying, actually, to me, no, sorry, it's absolutely, you can have circumstances where you have high magnitude of change. Indeed, that's higher than you've got here. You've got an EIA significant major effect, but actually that doesn't trigger the integrity of setting test. Is that right?
You're right to ask me that question, because I think what I've probably done is made assumptions about an EI methodology that's not in front of me. I don't know what criteria were used here, so I think it's possible to have an EI methodology that we might say doesn't trigger integrity of setting, but without that in front of me, I don't think I can reasonably comment on it.
Don't understand.
It would depend on the criteria.
Don't understand that. You've got the information in this report. Now, it's the principle. Obviously, the facts are on their own, but it's the transferability of principle. You have an EIA, which is saying major high magnitude of change leading to a major significant effect. We know what the asset is. We know why it's important. We know the panoramic views and so on. And notwithstanding that high degree of change, you've got the conclusions that there isn't then, it doesn't trigger the integrity of setting test. You said, yeah, that's fine. Right? Yeah, that often happens. And what I was really suggesting was that doesn't sit comfortably. This approach of the reporters doesn't sit comfortably, does it, with the approach that Hez was advocating? It would have been that the integrity of setting test would have been triggered a long time ago, wouldn't it?
I don't know without knowing what the criteria was for the magnitude of change.
Can we agree this, that you seem to be saying you can have a higher magnitude of change, because we've only got a moderate here at, in our case, but you can have a high magnitude of change on an asset which results in a major EIA effect, which in certain circumstances wouldn't trigger your integrity of setting threshold.
If the criteria don't focus on cultural significance, then I think that that can be the case, because our focus would always be on those impacts that are impacting cultural significance.
But you'd have to be saying, wouldn't you, therefore, that at Cregan there wasn't a focus on cultural significance?
I'm afraid I don't know how the
No,
assessment was undertaken.
But the minister tells us in a minute. We'll come to that. So we'll have a look. So we then get to the Anne Doonan site, and 450 onwards. It was a medium magnitude. So that's what you say here. So in the applicant's ES addendum, the predicted potential impact on Anne Doonan Dunn was associated as being a medium magnitude and a moderate significance. So significant in EIA terms. That's actually that's the combination that we've got here, isn't it? At Rigghill. Dunn's location characterised by location elevated immediately above confluence of two burns, not possible to be conclusive regarding precise use purpose of the Dunn. Fair enough. 454. We agree that Anne Doonan's position of the landscape would continue to be capable of being understood. The proposed development would, in our view, have some bearing on an observer's general experience of the setting of the monument, but the experience would not be altered to such a degree as to result in an observer being less capable of appreciating the Dunn's historical landscape context. We're satisfied that legibility of its setting would not be lost as a result of the Cregan proposal. Therefore, the overall integrity of its setting would therefore be unaffected. Slightly different formulation of words, but again, what they're doing is looking at is there enough left? Is there sufficient to allow somebody to stand there and go, I know what's good about this heritage asset? And that's I'm not holding you to those precise words, but that's the flavour, isn't it, of paragraph 454?
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. And 456 is just the conclusion where they say, we're satisfied no requirement the applicant set out exceptional circumstances justifying the proposal would not have a direct adverse effect or indeed the integrity of setting. So let's look at what the ministers had to say. Because of course Cregan was turned down, but it wasn't turned down on cultural heritage grounds. And for this, you need to go to the report, and it's the summary of the report, page 10.
Sorry, is this the decision letter for Cregan?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
No, this is the.
Oh,
what
sorry.
I've got a number of documents actually, which because there was also the confusing fact that there was the Blairy Hill application that was dealt with separately. So I am looking at the summary report, which is 12 pages long, which includes the recommendation.
What document reference is that? Sorry.
That's in my core document just before the full report that we just looked at.
So would it be part of CD 70?
Yes, it is in my.
Oh, okay, I see.
It is in my set.
And you said page 10. Is that
Yes.
marked as page 10 on the?
And it's a little heading cultural.
I have it. Sorry for that. Thank you.
No, it's all right. It's a cultural heritage. The setting of two scheduled monuments, that's Blairy Dun and Anne Doonan Dun, would be subject to a considerable degree of visual change. However, on the basis that the ability to understand and appreciate these scheduled monuments would not be unduly affected by the development. So that's cultural significance, isn't it?
That's how the ministers have framed it?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
The integrity of the setting of the scheduled monuments in question and all other historic environment assets would not be undermined. given that the proposal would not adversely affect the integrity of the setting of the scheduled monuments, exceptional circumstances not required to be shown. So the conclusion there is of, you can have high magnitude, you can have major effects, you can have significant change, you can have significant even diminution, but what you then don't necessarily do is trigger the integrity of setting threshold. That's what Cregan tells us.
I would agree that it's not automatic, that a major effect would be an effect on integrity of setting. Again, I do think, to me, it matters what the criteria were for magnitude of change, because if they're not focused on cultural significance, that could find a higher level of impact than if you were focused on cultural significance.
Yes, of course. It's not the scheme that's before this inquiry, but nevertheless, there's a lot of information here, and the reporter will have to form a view. Of course, what we do have in our case is an EIA approach, which is absolutely focused on cultural significance, isn't it? So we know the criteria in our case, we know how that's been arrived at. And what we can say is that we say that that's a slight change in terms of cultural significance. You say that it is a medium change. On the face of it, both of those are a lower degree of magnitude of change than that was found in Cregan.
Can I refer you to the criteria that are in the EIA handbook? Because I think it might be helpful to read out what substantial is in this, if with the criteria that we're using.
We're actually going to the EIA handbook a little bit later, but if you want to do that, but we are going there, so we can perhaps pick that up.
Can I just come in?
Yes.
Just at this point, I'm not going to give evidence here, but I just for a point of clarification, just so as we understand, I thought when you took me to the summary report, you were characterising that as ministers having written that.
No.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I misheard.
No, that's a summary of the report.
Yeah, I mean these are prepared by reporters just for convenience.
Yes, it's the summary of the report. That's the
fine.
page 10. So it's bringing all the points from the main report into the summary document. But it will come back to the EIA handbook if we may, Mr. Cameron. I want to just look at another decision.
I think it might be helpful for me to say it here, and I do have it in front of me.
Sure, let's do that. Yeah. Let me just get it if I may.
So if you're working on a paper copy, I'm looking at page 184.
184. Yeah.
And it's Appendix 1, Figure 1. This is the criteria for magnitude of change. And in this instance, as you said, I believe the appellant found an impact of a slight magnitude of change, and we identified moderate. I felt like it might be helpful to say what the substantial level of impact is, because I think it's a very, very high bar indeed. For substantial adverse changes to the setting or changes to the fabric or setting of a heritage asset resulting in the complete or near complete loss of its cultural significance, such that it may no longer be considered a heritage asset. And that's a higher bar, I think, than a lot of tables or criteria for magnitude of change would set. So this is just an example, I think, of why it's quite hard to read across that conclusion and say this magnitude of impact would be assessed the same in different contexts.
Well, that's true. We don't have the EIA from Cregan before us, but you've also got to apply, dare I say, a little bit of common sense. I don't know exactly where the substantial or the high magnitude change was, but it's not going to be less than moderate, which we've got now on a common sense basis, is it? And in any event, it's the concept. It's not the facts of Cregan I'm particularly interested, but it's how this all works. And I think where we've got to is a point of agreeing that at Cregan, with high magnitude change, they're applying their own criteria, major effect, visual change, significant degree of visual change. Nevertheless, that was found by reporters not to trigger the integrity of setting test. That's what Cregan tells us, isn't it?
In that instance?
Yeah. Thank you. And conceptually, you're agreeing that you're comfortable with that. That's where we, I think, have got to. It comes on to, it's adequately retained, isn't it? That's what we're now agreed, 4.4. And at the start of those questions was to to say you can absorb quite a lot of change, indeed a significant degree of change, and still not affect the integrity of setting. And you've agreed that, haven't you?
I have.
Thank you. Right, let's look at slightly different point, and this is quantumness. So this is CD 69. I go here because you has referred to this in relation to the visual permeability point principally, but I always want to read the rest of the decision, and there's some interesting things in here. So paragraph 370.
So I have it.
That's the section headed. But it's in the section on reporters' conclusions on cultural heritage and the historic environment. You see that? And the Quantumness Chamber Cairn and Prehistoric House is the closest of the three monuments to the proposed wind farm. Nearest turbine being approximately 674 metres away, subject to micro-siting. Cairn's relationship with the coastal plain identified as being important, and the turbines would be sited between the monument and the coastline. So there's then a discussion about physical condition, experience, road noise, and paragraph 3.77. The way in which the monument is experienced today is defined to a large degree by the tree belt, sense of enclosure that it gives to the size of the Cairn Prehistoric House. In relation to, I'm not sure whether it's Widderford or Wideford Hill, Chambered Cairn has highlighted the setting when our state incorporates how it's understood, appreciated, and experienced today, and is not restricted solely to historic or original aspects of setting. Applying this approach to the setting of the Quantumness monument, I find the tree belt in particular, but also relative proximity of a dwelling and agricultural buildings reduces the monument's sensitivity to further change to its setting. Given there's road noise in the A965, inevitably noise associated with farming activities at some times, the monument's not located in a particular isolated or tranquil position when the audibility of the wind farm would have an obvious impact on the experience of its setting. All told, therefore, I do not consider that the wind farm would adversely affect the setting of Quantumness Cairn to the extent that its integrity would be undermined. See, there's a formulation there. So integrity to the extent that its integrity would be undermined. What do you make of that?
Are you asking me to respond
As a bar, yes. Yeah.
Sorry?
As a bar, as a threshold, how do you say to the extent that its integrity would be that you can have change, but not considering that the wind farm would adversely affect to the extent that its integrity would be undermined? How useful a formulation do you think that is?
I suppose given that there's already adversely affect there, I think I would say it's probably redundant in terms of the policy test.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, let me read the sentence in its entirety, because I think I've read that, sure.
Sure.
I think that undermining something is an adverse effect. So I think it's a reasonable rephrasing of the test, although it's not the exact wording of the policy test. That I can understand why it's been put in that way.
All right. Paragraph 3.86 next. Whilst comparisons between the proposals must be made with great caution, absolutely, facts are case specific, aren't they? It can be noted that whilst the proposed turbines visible from Widderford Cairn, Wideford Cairn would be further to the north, they too would have a similar backdrop. In addition, height of the turbines more than double that of the now operational 67-metre turbines. As such, they would be seen to extend across the full vertical extent of the Bay of Firth. The land beyond would breach the skyline. Given that what seemed to be a somewhat lesser impact was deemed to be significantly harmful to the setting of Wideford Cairn in the Renabista case, this does give some additional credence to my finding the proposed development would be significantly detrimental to the setting of Wideford Cairn, and in in my judgment, this would be to the extent that the integrity of the setting, in terms of how its setting contributes to how the ken is appreciated and experienced, would be adversely affected, although it would not be entirely diminished. So you've got another layer of evaluation there, haven't you? You've got diminution. 377 talks about undermining, and then at 386 you've got not just diminished, but you've got entirely diminished. It rather sounds like south of the border there used to be a word vitiated, which is taking away all of. That rather sounds like that, doesn't it? Entirely diminished.
It does.
Yep. Okay. And 391 over the page. I find the extent to which the wind farm would influence how, this is a separate, Cueen, you probably pronunciation, Cueen Hill, Chamber Ken is experienced and appreciated will be adversely affected by the development's impact upon the integrity of its setting. However, and as at Woodford Hill, Wildford Hill, Chamber Ken, I do not consider the integrity of the monument setting would be so fundamentally altered to the extent that the ability to understand, appreciate and experience its cultural significance and relationships with its surroundings would be lost altogether. That's yet another formulation. I mean, entirely diminished, lost altogether. They're high degrees of change, aren't they?
These don't look like an application of policy test 145 in that regard, because this is different wording.
Well, it's grappling with the paragraph 145 test because that's what this is about. And it's obviously dealing with Hez's objection because there was an objection, wasn't there, here?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so where this takes us, interestingly, 397, drawing all of the above together, I find the development would be contrary to the provisions of LDP policy 8. So there's a fail against local policy here, and that it would fail to preserve the setting of the Wildford Hill and Cueen Chamber Kens, both of which are scheduled monuments. That would conflict with criterion D of policy 7, which presumes against development should have a significant adverse effect on the historic environment. The supplementary guidance energy requires significant adverse effects upon the historic environment to be weighed against benefits of the proposal. Policy 8 sets an arguably somewhat higher bar as where the integrity of the setting of a scheduled monument would be adversely affected. The policy resists developments unless there are exceptional circumstances, no practical alternative site and imperative reasons for overriding public need for the development. These are nevertheless matters which are more appropriately considered as part of the overall planning balance, which is set out in my overall conclusion in chapter 8. So you've got local development plan policy in this case, and that was a fail against that. That's the statute test. But in grappling, the point that I'm interested in is in grappling with integrity of setting, what the decision maker here was doing was looking for a very high degree of intervention, wasn't he? He was looking for total diminution or looking for fundamental alteration, those kind of words. That's what we see.
It's not clear whether or not that's the bar that they're applying, because they are saying it's a fail against that policy test, but those certainly are the words and they are asking those questions, yes.
Yeah, okay. That's useful. But so contextually, the reason for taking you there is the case that has wanted to go to. That chimes, doesn't it, with Cregan, in that there's an ability to, or there is an ability to accept change, indeed significant change in degree and major magnitude of harm, however that's defined, without necessarily triggering the integrity of setting test. They do it in different ways, different language and so on, but they're consistent to that extent, aren't they?
I think I would struggle to compare them to one another.
Or I can make my submissions on that. And Bernie now, obviously well known to the reporter. We don't need to go there really say to this extent. It looked at the Cregan decision, and what Little had to say was, look, I also need to look at experience. But beyond that, it didn't serve or wasn't intended to undermine the approach at Cregan, was it? It was actually saying, look, that's a
a helpful
fair
approach to
approach.
follow.
It's just, yeah, just it's a good approach to follow. And so far as the latitude, if you like, that's available in the integrity of setting test, the addition of experience into that bar doesn't make any material difference, does it? So in other words, what we're doing is applying Cregan. We accept the experience goes in there, and then we're applying that test, which is now formulated in paragraph 4.4 of the SOAM to the circumstances that we've got in this case.
I think adding experience might mean that other factors are being considered in a slightly different way, but I don't think it alters the bar.
Yeah,
I agree with
okay.
that.
So if that doesn't alter the bar, consistent with all of those approaches could be a finding of harm and indeed a considerable degree of harm, which does not trigger the integrity of setting test. It's a matter of judgment, but that would be right, wouldn't it?
I agree that there can be harm and considerable harm without an adverse effect on integrity of setting.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's I think that what that does then is move the definition in the SOAM on. I think it brings a number of points together. So what we're really talking about is the shading, and I think this is where this case now dissolves or resolves to. What we're talking about is the shading in terms of magnitude of impact on those elements of setting which go to cultural significance, upon which Hes say there's half a notch up the scale. In other words, we're saying that they are a slight impact. You're saying there's a medium impact, and they're the three which Dr. Carter picked out, aren't they? That's the difference. That's why we are at a different place.
We have come to different judgments about the degree of impact, yes.
But it's only that. So analytically, I don't think there's anything between us. From on the basis of what we've gone through this morning, that's all now agreed. What we're looking at is within that framework. So we've accepted we can have considerable harm and so on. What you're saying is, well, there's a shading in relation to magnitude of harm, and it can't be any more of a shading than half a notch, because we're saying slight, you're saying moderate. That's the only difference. And it's only on certain aspects of setting which goes to cultural significance where there's a difference, and I'm going to suggest that they are the ones that were identified as being the points of difference by Dr. Carter.
I'm not quite sure of what you mean by half a notch, but I agree that the next step up in terms of how the criteria are set out in the EI handbook.
In terms of the scale,
you're
saying slight, you're saying moderate.
Agreed. Yeah. In terms of those criteria and how they're explained. In terms of where that difference of professional judgment is and what factors and how they're impacted, I think it would be fair to say that I am not the correct expert to speak to that, because the specific assessment of impacts on this asset has been undertaken by Dr. McLeod-Rivet.
Then in which case I'll put the questions to her. That's very fair. It's the structure and the analytical structure that I'm interested in discussing with you. In relation to the EIA handbook, I promised to take you back to that. So let's just look at that for a moment.
Have it.
Just wanted to start. I mean, this is a document that was produced, wasn't it, by Hes?
Hes and NatureScott, or SNH as was, yes.
Yes, as it was. It tells us, of course, in the introduction, it's page 8, box A.1. Intended to provide competent authority, statutory consultees and others involved in the EIA process with practical guidance and ready source of information. Provides advice to SNH and Hes staff on procedures surrounding EIA casework, concentrates on treatment of natural cultural heritage assets. So it's intended in that last sentence to help all of those involved in the process to make it more effective and therefore lead to better informed decisions. That's all general stuff. This is a document, isn't it, that Hes endorses, and indeed in other cases you say to, I've seen some of the emails, you say to other developers you should use this handbook as your guide.
Yeah, we say that the best practice guidance in it is helpful, yes.
And to that extent, Appendix 1, if we can turn there, we went through a number of these sections with Dr. Carter. I'm not going to go through all of them. But paragraph 34, Appendix 1 is important. The above list concentrates on aspects of setting that contribute positively to cultural significance, but the baseline survey should also gather information regarding detracting factors and neutral aspects of setting. It is setting so far as it goes to or better explains cultural significance that's at the heart of the exercise, isn't it? What we're looking at is how setting might reveal something about the asset.
Yes, the contribution that setting makes to cultural
Yeah,
significance.
it put another way, it's setting's not a standalone designation. It's not setting for setting's sake, is it? That's not the point. It's looking at how it then feeds into cultural significance.
Yes, which is why we've agreed that when assessing impacts on integrity of setting, we're focusing on impacts on factors that contribute to cultural significance.
Yes, it's just important. It might seem a simple question, but I just want to make sure that we've got that right, and I can put that in my closings. Indeed, you can perhaps take it in this way. There's nothing in the work that was done by AOC that deviates from the good practice which is set out in this, because you're not criticising the exercise that was undertaken.
I agree with that. Yes, I think in terms of fundamental approach. However, we did have some concerns about how it was being explained, and I think particularly the complexity of having multiple matrices. But in terms of assessing impacts on cultural significance, I think there probably is adequate there in that methodology.
Yeah, it complies with the guidelines, and certainly nobody suggested otherwise in relation to. Yeah, there are different, and also.
Excuse me. To be clear, there's no guidelines to comply with. This is best practice guidance.
Okay, I don't want to split hairs. Best practice guidance.
There's something about compliance. I thought it was worth making that clear.
Right. In a sense, that's fair, because whilst practitioners are given help, there's an awful lot of professional judgment that's called upon, isn't it? And whether it's LVIA or ecology or cultural heritage, there are best practice guidance documents out there to assist, but there's no one size fits, is there? There are different ways of reporting. There are different ways of of expressing things, but as long as the fundamentals are there, as long as the directive is complied with in the identification of likely significant environmental effects, that's the point, isn't it?
That's the most important point, yes. And HES also has a role in advising on EIA and best practice. So I think that there's adequacy, and then of course you can go beyond that in terms of best practice and clarity and transparency. But yes.
Yeah. Okay, but we can agree. I don't think it's controversial. There isn't just one way of doing this. There are this is guidance. Take it away. As long as it's clear and transparent and does the job in terms of law, how it looks, whether you do it graphically, whether you present it, that is of lesser importance, isn't it?
I agree.
Thank you. And you yourself or have used, whether it's you or the other witness, have used these EIA criteria to come to your own view, haven't you, in relation to magnitude of change here at Rigghill? So when you say
yes,
slight,
that's in Dr. McLeod-Rivett's report. Yes.
Yes. So when we say slight, you say moderate. That's with reference, isn't it, to this handbook?
It is.
And we can see what that means. Paragraph on page 184. You've already taken us helpfully to that table in relation to the Cregan decision, but we can just turn to that. Just turn to Appendix 1, Figure 1.
I have it.
So adverse where you pitch this is changes to the elements of the fabric or setting of the heritage asset that contribute to its cultural significance such that this is substantially altered. Slight changes to the elements of the fabric or setting of the heritage asset that contribute to its cultural significance such that this is slightly altered. So the difference is between substantial alteration to changes to some elements and slight alteration, isn't it, to some elements? That's the difference.
Yeah, that's the threshold for moderate is substantially altered.
Okay. In terms of, that's helpful. I think we can leave that there. In terms of managing change, you're almost there, Ms. Cameron. In terms of managing change, obviously a creature of policy. It is, there's no definition, is there? There's nothing in the document itself which seeks to define integrity of setting, and people have obviously been wrestling with it. We spent probably an hour discussing it this morning. It's there's a lot of professional judgment involved.
Yes, there's no definition in managing change. There's no published definition.
Managing change itself has its useful guidance, but it's not. It allows flexibility, doesn't it? There again, it's a signpost, a number of ways of doing it.
Yes, it sets out an approach, and it says that you may tailor that to circumstances as appropriate, I suppose.
Yeah. You don't have to have slavish adherence in the same way as we've agreed in relation to EIA. You don't have to have slavish adherence, do you, to the structure, subheadings and so on. What we're looking at is we're concentrating on substance and not form.
Yes, although form, of course, can add substantially to clarity.
Of course it can. Of course it can. It's got to be expressed clearly. But there are different ways of presenting information which still deal with the substantive points, if I can put it like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's some criticism of Dr. Carter's work and Ms. Roy's work to say, well, look, you haven't done this systematic managing change assessment. And we disagree with that. But the point is that it doesn't have to look like your HES produced managing change systematic assessment, does it, to take on board all of the points in managing change and in substance get to the same point?
No, I think what we're saying is that to react to the statement of agreed matters, because the starting point is to look at factors of setting that contribute to cultural significance, that then ties in with the managing change guidance. So in that sense, the structure in the managing change guidance note is helpful for that formulation for integrity of setting.
Yeah, but having read and having heard Dr. Carter's evidence, can we agree this, that the factors that you need to take into account, allowing for flexibility and so that the document provides, that the factors that one needs to take into account identified by managing change have indeed been taken into account by Dr. Carter and Ms. Roy? It ultimately comes down to the professional judgment, the weighting on those three factors that makes a difference.
I think there's a difference in terms of fine grain of how the factors have been engaged with, but certainly Dr. Carter's assessment refers to what he considers to be factor setting and those that are affected. Yeah. Not, and Dr. McLeod breaks down factors in a very different way. So to say there are these three, factor doesn't necessarily read across very well between the two assessments.
Well, I'm going to ask. I can explore those more site-specific points in later on. But whether it's three, I don't mind whether they're subdivided into 3, 4, or 5. It doesn't matter. But what Dr. Carter has done is attempted to say, look, what's the difference between why have we got to a different point? He says they're 3. If you say they're 4, I don't mind. Well, we'll come to that. The point I'm getting at is that Dr. Carter, it can't be, HES is not saying that we have missed anything the managing change that says that we should have picked up. We've done that. We've just come to a different view based on ultimately on that shading of that comes with weighting.
I think that it hasn't been explained in the terms of the factors of setting and how specifically they contribute to cultural significance. So in terms of the clarity of the steps towards the conclusion, it isn't as transparent as the report that Dr. McLeod-Rivet has submitted.
Well, I don't agree with that, but even if that's right, that is not saying, and I think can we agree this, with a caveat, you say it may be to do with presentation, that you are content that the appellant has engaged with all the points that we need to do in managing change, we come to a different result. It's ultimately about or really, let me put it another way. This is not about methodological failings, is it? This is not about that. This is about professional judgment in relation to factors of setting or elements of setting which go to cultural significance.
I think that methodological issues or how they've been explained or how things have been set out have confused things and have meant that we're having a series of conversations about them. But at the heart of this case, as I understand it, is the difference of professional judgment, as you put it, on the degree of impact.
Yeah, well, it's helped your answers to me earlier on in relation to integrity of setting. I think, quite very clear. It sets the environment, if you like, for the debate. And I think the site-specific stuff will come on to with the other witness. Let me just check my notes, Ms. Cameron, but I'm pretty much there. I don't need to ask you about the heritage interpretation plan because I think that's you're happy with that, aren't you? Yeah.
I think we agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the quality of that, you heard Roy yesterday. What's proposed is at the higher end, isn't it? And in terms of what we're trying to achieve, it's at the higher end of what you might do.
I'm sorry, I don't think I can say that I have a scale for that. And again, this is probably not quite within my realm of expertise as that kind of specific.
All right. Are you not comparing it with other cases then, but in terms of what you try to achieve, so opening up heritage for different groups and different levels of knowledge, what's being done is a genuine attempt, isn't it, to open up the what's good about Outerwards Fort to a number of groups.
I think that the evidence in chief yesterday was really helpful in terms of putting that in terms of how it sits with HEPS and place and time. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
That's very helpful. Thank you, and very fair. Just give me a second. That's my notes checked. Thank you very much, Ms. Cameron, for your answers.
Okay. Mr. Hardy, are you still? Yeah, you're still there. You've just turned the camera off. Is that right? You can still hear me.
I'm still here. Just when I'm not talking, turn my camera off. Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, thank you both. I'm just going to check. I think I had a few questions, but I think we've probably covered them all. But I just want to check my notes too. While I'm doing that, Mr. Milne, have you any thoughts as to how long you might take in re-examination?
I've got no questions for Ms. Cameron, so no re-examination.
Okay, right. Bear with me 2 seconds, and I'm just going to have a quick look to see what my own notes. think we've probably covered everything. I'd said earlier that I was going to ask, when I'd asked Miss Dr. Carter about the three different words in the guidance and meaning, I think, however, you've either been taken there or else you've agreed with some of the statements from yesterday. So I think I'm clear on all that. So yes, no, I don't think there's anything I need to ask you, to be honest. So thank you very much, Ms. Cameron.
Thank you.
That's 11:15 then. So shall we say is 11:30 a good time to come back at?
Yes, it's time for a cup of coffee. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you very much, everyone.
I joined the setup, so I joined. You can see it. There she's on the.
Good morning, everyone again. Good morning, Dr. McLeod-Rivet.
Good morning.
If everyone's ready, then see Mr. Hardy. That's good. Just keeping a look, I haven't yet seen the visualization that we talked about yesterday, but I'm assuming we'll see it at some point during today. Anyway, that we can bother about that just now. So, Mr. Milne, I will pass over to you then to start to hear the evidence from Dr. McLeod-Rivet. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The documents, good morning, Dr. McLeod-Rivet. The documents to which I would intend to refer you are Dr. Carter's precognition and report, your own precognition and report, and two documents which we've not looked at previously, and that the first one of those is CD 49, Cultural Heritage Viewpoint 1, Roman Fortlet Photo Montage, and CD 001.002.1, the EIA report volume 003B visualizations. And it might be handy for everyone, given that that's 137 pages on the PDF, to turn to PDF page 90, which is where the wireframes to which I will refer begin.
Thank you. I have this.
Thank you. Dr. McLeod-Rivet appears to have disappeared from view. We are trying to bring her back. She's on the screen.
I can still see you, Dr. McLeod-Rivet. I can't see Mr. Milne anymore. He's disappeared.
I can see Mr. Milne. He did disappear. He's come back. I
Great.
can't see anybody else. I can see you, sir, but nobody else.
Right. I've got everyone back in view now.
Ah, I can't see. I don't know whether others can, but I can't see Dr. McLeod-Rivet. What I do have is on the roundels on the left, on the right-hand side, what Dr. McLeod-Rivet was coming up as Cameron Gregg. I think that was her moniker, but all I've got is the roundel. I don't have her in view.
Can we please just, sorry, this is the end of the break and it was working when we started. Can we have 2 minutes, please, just to get this sorted? Obviously, we need everyone.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
thank
And
you.
I think I've got hard copies of the wireframes somewhere, so I'm going to dig them out as well.
Right. Okay, good use of time. Thank you.
Is all working again, do we think, for everyone?
Yes, I can now see everybody. Thank you.
Apparently what we had to do was turn the camera off and switch it on again. So good old-fashioned way of sorting IT
That
difficulties.
is always the best advice with IT, Mr. Milne. Switch it off.
So there we are. We know what to do if it happens again. Right. So sorry for that. Dr. McLeod-Rivet, good morning again. Can I please start by asking you to take us through the process which you undertook with a view to analysing setting?
When I started to look at this, I followed the process outlined in the Managing Change setting document. So I started to, clearly we know which site, which monument which historic asset we're actually working with in this case. So I started to define the setting of the Outerwards Roman fortlet. And then with a view to then moving on to assessing the impact of the development on that. So I used the factors as outlined in the Managing Change setting guidance and I went through them systematically one by one, looking to see which factors contributed to the setting of the fortlet. Some factors had no contribution as outlined in the guidance, so I didn't include those. But I went through one by one, identifying which factors they were that were contributing to the setting of the monument. So those are outlined in my report from paragraph 32 onwards. And I won't necessarily go through those in detail at the moment. We can come back to them if we need to. Having done that, I identified 4 particular factors which made a real contribution to the cultural significance of the monument. And these factors were, and they're at paragraph 58 in my report, these factors were the wide arc of view over the Firth of Clyde, the relationship, the visual relationship between the fortlet and maritime routeways on the Firth of Clyde, its physical location at a natural junction of land routes leading to and from the coast and north, and indeed south, and its relationship to the other Roman monuments which were monitoring the Firth of Clyde and protecting the western end of the Antonine Wall. So I identified 4 key factors that were making a major contribution to cultural significance, to the cultural significance of the monument. That's not to say there weren't other factors in the setting of the monument that contributed to its cultural significance, but I felt that these were the key ones and that they were integral to the cultural significance of the monument and the ability to understand it and appreciate it and to experience it in terms of its function and location and role and all the other aspects that go up to make the cultural significance. So having done that, I then took forward those 4 key setting factors and looked at the impact that the proposed development would have on those. And I look at that in my report from paragraph 59 onwards. And in order to look at the impact, I used the suggested impacts that are outlined in the Managing Change document. So I just carried through the process as it's outlined in the Managing Change document. And once again, some of these changes, some of these impacts weren't applicable to this particular monument. But I looked at interruption of key views, I looked at domination and detraction, I looked at the scale of the proposed development, what the existing built landscape context was like, the magnitude of change, and I came to a conclusion that the proposals would have a significant detrimental impact on the ability to experience, understand, and appreciate the factors that contribute to the setting, the cultural significance of the monument.
Dr. McLeod-Rivet, could you take us to now, please, whichever you would find the most helpful, either the photo montage or the wireframes, and take us through that part of your report to which you've just referred about impact of the proposed development, and basically tie your report together with the visualizations to help us fully understand what you're saying here.
Just to remind you, the four factors that I was particularly, the analysis suggested made a particular contribution to the setting of cultural significance of the monument are its open arc of view, in which I'm in agreement with Dr. Carter, its specific routeways within that open arc of view overlooking maritime routeways, the location at the natural junction of land routes, and the relationship with the other Roman monuments. And if we look first at the wireframes, that might be easiest because the photo montage, the photographic images there are not as clear as they might be. It's often fairly hazy up there. So if we look at the wireframes, and that's CD 001002.1, and the page is, it's page 90 of the PDF. In this, you can see that the proposed development is in two groups of turbines, one either side of the Skelmorley Glen, the slopes of the Skelmorley Glen, leading down almost directly west from the monument. This wireframe is done from the monument to the shore of the Clyde. And if you look at the far shore of the Clyde, you can see that there are islands, the islands of Arran and Bute, and then there's a various openings between the islands, waterway openings between the islands, and in particular behind the group of 4 turbines on the northern slope of the Skelmorley Glen, there's this large opening between the islands, and that's the Kyles of Bute. Now, the nearest of these turbines would be around about a kilometre from, just a little over a kilometre from the monument. And the turbines are, the proposed turbines would be 150 metres high. And the full extent of all the turbines is visible. The associated infrastructure, much of that would be visible as well, the roads, the access tracks. And most of the turbines, all of the turbines, I believe, break the skyline, and some of them are at above hub height on that skyline. The impacts of this would be, I think, on the setting of the monument would be very significant. And specifically, I think it's worth bearing in mind when we're thinking about these impacts, when we're thinking about all the impacts that I'm going to discuss, that the turbines are kinetic, they're moving, so we're not dealing simply with a situation where we have narrow upright towers. We're dealing with a situation where the whole of the sweep of the blades of each turbine is going to form an obstruction or a distraction from the view. And if you look at paragraph 64 of my report, you can see that interruption of key views is a change to the setting of the monument. And the turbines would interrupt the currently uninterrupted arc of view from south to north across the Firth of Clyde, which is a key characteristic of the monument setting that we're in agreement with the appellants about. That open arc of view would no longer be open, and it would have a serious impact on the ability to understand and appreciate this reason for why the monument was located specifically there. But the proposed development would also be in the foreground of what we identified as highly sensitive, specific views within that arc of view. And I'll come back to this, but I think I should emphasize at this point, there's no contradiction between one aspect of setting being the open arc of view and another aspect of the setting being key sight lines within that open arc. They're not mutually exclusive. And these turbines, particularly the group that sits on the northern side of the Skelmorley Glen, would be directly in front of what I have identified as a particularly strategic sight line and point of view over towards the waters around the northern Cowes Butte. And then it would also, these turbines would also be in the foreground. They'd be in the foreground of that view, they break the horizon, but also because they're kinetic, even if you try to look through them, the movement of the turbine blades will tend to draw your attention back towards the foreground rather than the background, which was a key element of the setting of the monument. The other thing is that the scale of these turbines is going to dominate that landscape. The landscape's currently quite open. It doesn't have much modern development in it. These are very large. And we don't feel that a monument itself needs to have been created to dominate the landscape in order for the setting of the monument to be dominated. So I think the scale of these turbines in relation to the landscape and the monument itself is very clearly dominant. And that ties up, that really covers domination and detraction as an impact, and also the scale of the proposed development. The existing built environment that surrounds the area is something to bear in mind as well, because the existing built environment allows us to understand the key factors relating to the setting of monuments. So when we compare the scale of the proposed development and the existing built environment, we're in a situation where there would be a significant change to the built context of the monument. So the monument's located in a largely undeveloped area. There's open rough grazing. The nearest built features are the farm track that crosses the monument. There's a dry stone dike up to the north, and to the west. And there's post and wire farm fences. It's an agricultural landscape. The agricultural use of this landscape doesn't interfere with the understanding of the key factors of the monument. But the proposals would be introducing a very large-scale modern development into that landscape, which would, though the landscape itself is not a key factor contributing to the cultural significance of the monument, nonetheless, the landscape allows the appreciation of the key factors we identified, and therefore introducing a modern industrial large-scale development into this small-scale agricultural built environment would create a marked contrast that would interfere with the ability to actually understand and appreciate and experience the monument in its current setting. And we are in agreement with the appellant that the monument is sensitive. The setting of the monument is sensitive because this is a monument of national importance. And this is one of the factors that was taken into account in the appellant's analysis for the environmental impact assessment. So the magnitude of change in relation to the sensitivity of the setting of the monument would be a very significant issue and a very significant impact. So our conclusion, having done that, having gone through that process and having looked at the photomontages, the wireframes, having made site visits, having considered and analysed the setting of the monument, was to feel that there would be a really very significant detrimental impact on the ability to experience and understand and appreciate the factors that contribute significantly to the cultural significance of the monument and to its setting. So that was the process that we went through when we were assessing this.
Thank you. And just to ensure we tie that into the agreed working definition for the concept of integrity, what is your evidence regarding the application of that definition changes to factors of setting that contribute to cultural significance such that the understanding, appreciation and experience of an asset are not adequately retained will affect the integrity of setting?
When we agreed that definition after this report had been prepared. So in the process of preparing my precognition, I went through the report again to ensure that this didn't actually make any change to my understanding of it and my advice. And I'd refer you to paragraph 101 in my report, where I concluded that, and this is, remember, before that definition was agreed, but I think it works very well with our agreed definition, that the proposed development would lead to a real diminution of the ability to understand, appreciate and experience the monument in its setting, and therefore that it was unacceptable in terms of paragraph 145 of the SPP. And this initial conclusion was tied back to the first definition of integrity of setting that we had, which spoke about the importance that the ability to understand, appreciate and experience the monument should not be diminished. Diminution being the noun that relates to the verb diminish.
How would you contrast your conclusion with that of Dr. Carter? And you may wish to refer to his report at paragraph 43.
Yes, one moment. Dr. Carter, at paragraph 43, takes forward his conclusion that there would be an adverse effect of slight magnitude on the cultural significance of the fortlet, and that would therefore not affect the integrity of the setting of the monument. I think there's this is the key to our professional disagreement on the matter. I think it's important to be aware that Dr. Carter identified two factors of setting that influence the cultural significance, that feed into the cultural significance of the monument. Those were the location of the monument on a ridge leading north to south, and the open arc of view from the monument over the Clyde. He argued that only one of these would be affected by the development, and that's the open arc of view, and that the development would be permeable and that would only occupy a little over a third of that arc of view, and that therefore that was not a major impact on the monument. And I think that's really part of the root of our differing professional judgment on this. Dr. Carter argues that in paragraph 43 that the presence of the wind farm would not lead to the loss of our ability to understand the location chosen for the fortlet and the wider military context in which that decision was made. I identified 4 major factors which were key to the cultural significance of the monument, of which 3 were affected by this. The only factor that I identified that was key to the cultural significance of the monument that is not affected by the proposed development is the relationship with Lurgmoor and Bishopton, the other two monuments which form the group of three overlooking the Clyde. So I feel that the other thing that Dr. Carter has not fully taken into account is the extent to which this monument, its cultural significance is to a large extent vested in its setting. The settings of portlets are highly individual. They are created for specific reasons at junctions of routes and overlooking to overlook and to control movement in the landscape. And the three factors which feed into the cultural significance are all factors which relate to that function in the landscape. It's the impact of the development on the junction of land routes, which is the specific local location factor. The monument is at the junction of the ridge, which Dr. Carter identifies, and two side glens, the Nodsdale Glen and the Glen Morley. And these all come together, and the monument is situated at that point. And the proposed development would detract significantly from the ability to understand Skelmorley Glen, the Glen Morley, as a direct route down to the coast, and as one of the reasons for the location of that. I think the breaking of the open arc of view is also a very significant impact on the setting of the monument. That the monument is not set as close to the shore as it potentially could have been. The arc of view seems to have been prioritized in the location of the monument, so that the arc of view, this monument overlaps with the arc of view of Lurgmoor, so that the maximum area of the Clyde could actually be covered. And I think that breaking that arc of view detracts from the ability to do that and to understand that that was key to the location of the monument. And the third factor, which Dr. Carter disagrees with, and sorry, I may be going ahead of myself, but is this issue of specific sightlines relating to maritime routes that join the Clyde on the opposite shore, and particularly the Cowes of Bute. And the monument, the proposed development would actually be directly interposed between the monument and those sightlines. So it would dominate it, it would distract from it, detract from it. Sorry, I do apologise. I put distract at various points instead of detract.
Dr. McLeod, would you mind putting your camera off and on again?
Sorry, has it done it again?
I was waiting for a moment when I wasn't going to interrupt. Go back in a second. Thank you. You're maybe doing that a few times. Sorry, I interrupted what you were saying there, but perhaps just to ensure that the points are caught. Dr. Carter, in his recognition of 4.4, sets out what he understands the key differences between you and him. Now, you've commented on this to some extent, but just for our notes, could you please respond to the bullet points, the three differences identified by Dr. Carter at 4.4 of his recognition?
Yes. Dr. Carter has read through my report, and he's drawn out three areas where he feels that we disagree. The relevance of the current land use and the landscape character, the identification of relevance of Skelmorley Glen as a natural routeway, and the enhanced importance of views towards the Cowes of Bute and Rothsay Harbour. I think with regards to the first point, the relevance of current land use and landscape character, I didn't identify that as a factor, key factor contributing to the setting of the monument. However, it is mentioned a number of times in my report. I'm very aware of that. And the reason for that is that it facilitates the understanding and appreciation and experience of the factors that do contribute to the cultural significance of the monument. So current landscape use and character has fed into many of the other points in my report. Dr. Carter disagrees with the relevance of Skelmorley Glen as a natural routeway. He feels, I think his words were that it was a ravine with a rapid stream at the bottom. That's not my experience of that route on the ground. If we were to look back to the visualizations, either of the visualizations would do, but we could look at CD 001.002.1, the wireframe and photo montage. You'll see that the development is focused around either side of Skelmorley Glen. And indeed, a view line has been left open down the middle of that glen. And that the location of the monument at the head of that glen, the junction of those land routes, is clear from both the wireframes and from the photo montage. And that's a very direct route west down to the shoreline. It's farmed now. It's used as the main route to the site now. I don't feel that it is in any way an impassable ravine. Sorry, that's probably, I'm not sure that Dr. Carter used impassable as an adjective. I believe he just described it as a ravine with a rapid stream at the bottom of it. So I think it's very clear that it was accessible and used as a routeway. The other issue that he takes, the other factor that he took issue with was the importance of views towards particularly the Cowes of Bute and the routeways that link to the Clyde on the opposite shore. And I think his argument was that I was analysing this on the basis of a lack of understanding of Roman period transport. However, we know that the Romans were using boats for transport. That's how they got to Britain. We know that the local Iron Age people were also using boats. There would have been no point in monitoring the Clyde if this were not the case. And indeed, there would have been no point in the Antonine Wall stretching from the Clyde and joining the Clyde at Old Kilpatrick. So I think that the fact that we have 3 known Roman monuments on the south shore of the Clyde, at Whitemoss at Bishopton, the fort, and then the 2 fortlets outerwards in the Moor, indicates that the waterways were a key strategic consideration for the Roman army and seen as a vulnerability that had to be overlooked. And if that is the case, then an analysis of routes linking to the waterways becomes very important. And the Cowes of Bute leads to sea lochs and sea passages that stretch up and down, and indeed out to the west, up and down the west coast of Scotland. And those sea passages are within, and those sea lochs are within areas which were not in Roman control, and they are largely not visible, or were largely not visible to the Romans. That land was all out with Roman control. And so monitoring the junctions between these largely concealed routes and the Clyde, which we know to be a strategic consideration, then is clearly a key part of assessing the setting of the monument. And the fact that the monument is directly opposite the entrance to the Cowes of Bute is important. By the way, I did not in my report suggest that Rothesay was a built port during the Roman period. I used Rothesay as a place name indicator so that people could see the area that I was talking about and refer to it easily. It's a natural harbour, but I have no evidence or information about how it may have been used in the Roman period.
If we take you to Dr. Carter's conclusions at 5, do you have anything to add by way of response to those 3 paragraphs?
I agree with Dr. Carter that this comes down to a difference in professional judgment about the impacts of the proposed development on the setting of the monument and whether that affects the integrity of the setting of the monument. I feel that the factors of setting that we have identified are absolutely key to the cultural significance of this monument, and that therefore the impacts on these does really affect the ability to understand and appreciate and experience the monument in its setting, and that therefore it does affect the integrity of the setting of the monument. And that means that it's not acceptable by the policy test.
What is it about this monument setting impact that you've just described that raises issues in the national interest, being what we hear is the threshold for which Historic Environment Scotland would decide to object?
Fortlets are part of a class of monuments. Fortlets are a class of monuments that were located in the landscape for very specific reasons. There's quite a lot of variability in size and layout and so on of fortlets. And so because this is the case, fortlets that are judged to be of national importance and are scheduled, such as Outerwards Roman Fortlet, have a great deal of their nationally important cultural significance vested in the specific setting that they are in, because that setting is very functional. The setting is the reason for the existence of the fortlet at that point in the landscape. And therefore, when we looked at this fortlet and looked at the proposed development, we felt that the setting of this fortlet is very clearly, the cultural significance of this fortlet is very clearly vested in the way that it has been carefully located in the landscape to have this overview of the Clyde and specifically to monitor particular aspects of that and to move around the landscape as well as staying in the one point to do so. And I think that that's where it was very clear to us that this raises issues in the national interest, because the diminution of the ability to understand those factors of setting leads to a real diminution of the ability of the cultural significance of the monument. You know, it is diminished by the proposals. It would be diminished by the proposals. And that therefore we felt that that raised issues in the national interest. And we couldn't figure out any suggestions of mitigation. You know, the proposals we're looking at here at the moment in this wireframe are the second iteration of design. And when the first iteration of design said this is going to raise problems, we advised from the beginning that we thought it was highly likely that this would raise issues in the national interest for the setting of the fortnight. And this is the second iteration, and at that point, the applicant and ourselves agreed that it was, the applicant said, basically, we can't diminish, we can't reduce, we can't mitigate this by design any longer. And we accepted that, and we can't think of any suggestions to mitigate this by design to an extent that would reduce the impacts sufficient that we could withdraw our objection.
Thank you. And then a wide question to conclude. Is there anything else, Dr. McLeod-Rivet, that you would like to add during your evidence in chief by way of response to what you heard in evidence yesterday from Dr. Carter and Ms. Roy?
I think we found ourselves very greatly in agreement. And I feel, and I've said in my report, that the heritage interpretation plan that's being offered as offsetting mitigation is of merit in itself. However, we keep on coming back to the issue that we feel that wouldn't actually have any impact on the negative, the adverse effects that the proposals would have on the setting of the monument. The adverse effects are there. And therefore we feel that the heritage interpretation plan is a separate issue.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions at this stage.
Sorry, that took some while there. Computer's just been a little bit slow. Thank you very much, Mr. Milne. Mr. Hardy, if you're ready now to begin cross-examination, we can start that. Or equally, I mean, it's 12:15. It might well just be sensible time to stop for lunch.
I'm happy to go. I think with a fair wind, we'll actually be finished before lunch. I think if we're prepared to sit till sort of 1:15, I think we'll be done. So I'm entirely in your hands, but I'm ready to go.
Dr. McLeod-Rivet, are you content with that, just to press on just now?
Yes, if that suits you, sir, that's fine.
That sounds good.
Right, good morning. I think it's before lunch. I'll say good morning, Dr. McLeod-Rivet. Same documents that we've had before. I don't think any real surprises. You've got the montage and the wireframes out. Can I just start with a general question? You heard the cross-examination of Miss Cameron, and I want to just make sure that you're not in disagreement with her on in anything she said. Can we just take it that that evidence is agreed by you on behalf of Hez?
Yes, we can.
And to that extent, there was useful discussion about how other reporters have looked at this integrity of setting question. And we went to Cregan, as you know. It might just be worth picking that up. So it's CD 72.
If you can give me one moment to find and open that.
Of course.
Yes.
Paragraph 449. So the effect on the Dunn's relationship with higher ground would be subject to a significant degree of visual change. But we consider that Blary Dunn's location in the landscape would still be capable of being understood and appreciated. We consider that wind turbines would very obviously be perceived as contemporary structures. This contrast would enable the host landscape's relationship with Blary Dunn to be interpreted. In essence, an observer would be able to clearly understand what the landscape would be like in the absence of the wind turbines, and appreciation of the Dunn's historical setting in the landscape still be capable of being appreciated. On this basis, we find that Craig will not have a bearing upon the overall integrity of the setting of Blary Dunn. Those sorts of points don't have to tie ourselves necessarily to facts from a different case, but the modernity of turbines, the ability for an observer to see through and past them, to understand there's juxtaposition of new and old, and to apply common sense, they're things which would apply in this case as well, wouldn't they? The reporters looking at this, and when you stand at afterwards for, those are the sorts of considerations he will want to take into account. Do you agree with that? Yeah, thank you. So when, I mean, you look at the visualizations and you draw out the photo montage, it's a fairly obvious point, but the panoramic arc of view is there. It's, of course, that's how as nature has laid that out. That's not moved anywhere. You have people standing at outerwards, looking up. They know their turbines. But they can see through. They can see around them. They've got that ability to discern what's old and new. And that same dose of common sense, or that same dose of discernment that was applied at Craigan would apply here, wouldn't it?
I think that it's important to be aware that these issues need to be considered on a case-by-case basis, considering the specific factors of setting and their contribution to the cultural significance of specific monuments. I think that in this case, in the case that we are considering here at the moment, that the location of those turbines in that view will have a very significant effect on the ability to actually understand and appreciate that view.
Yeah.
And in part that's because while the turbines are clearly modern and they don't occupy every bit of ground in that, they have moving blades and they are kinetic and they draw the eye. So
yeah,
they draw the eye.
As all turbines would do, of course. So at Craig, I mean, of course, they're turbines, and I'm not holding. I'm saying not suggesting that a reporter needs to be on rail tracks to adopt the same language. But if you were doing that, the sort of things that the reporters were interested in there, modernity, perceive as contemporary structures, you can see through them, you can see around them, all of those factors apply just as much, don't they? Yes, you've got to look at the absolute, you look at outwards, of course, and you look exactly where these turbines, you look exactly at the factors, of course. But the principle of common sense, of discernment, of ability of people when they're understanding, appreciating and experiencing an asset, that still applies, doesn't it?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So people can see, standing at Outerwoods Fortlet, the fact that you've got, turbines in the view doesn't take away your understanding of the arc of view to anything other than a slight degree, does it? People can see why and understand why the Romans were doing what they were doing. They put the Fortlet there so they could look out in a panoramic way. That is still there. What you have, you've got turbines interposed, but that does not interfere with that ability to appreciate that to anything other than a slight degree, does it?
I would argue actually that it does. I would disagree with you in that. I think it has a significant impact on the ability to appreciate that open arc of view. But I also feel that it has a very significant impact on the ability to appreciate the detail of the far shore and the junctions between the other waterways and the Clyde, and the significance of those.
Yeah.
So no, I'm afraid I wouldn't agree with you there.
Well, no, you're not
I
going to.
do
I'm
feel-
not expecting you to roll over. Of course, that's the difference. But I'm interested in why, because as I stood on that fortlet, I'm sure you stood there yourself, and you look at it and you look at the montages. Your ability to understand in locational terms what the Romans were doing is pretty much the same. You've got turbines going to be there. Yes, there's an acceptance of. You may even say I'd prefer they're not there, even if that was a view. But your ability to understand why the Romans chose that site isn't affected in anything other than a slight way, is it?
No, I disagree with you, I'm afraid. I feel that it does have a moderate impact, a significant change in EIA terms to that setting aspect that feeds directly into the cultural significance of the monument.
Explain it to me. If you could explain it to me then, Doctor, why, how does that work? You've got the fortlet. You can see the location. You can see the panoramic view that's there. The turbines up. How does that prevent anybody to the moderate degree of change that you're talking about from understanding why it was located there? Just explain to me.
The turbines will act as turbines do in a landscape as a focus for the view, so that the landscape, as you stand there, that view outwards, is currently dominated by the waterway. And the factors that we have agreed, or that we have assessed as key setting factors, are impacted because the focus of the view shifts towards the turbines and away from the waterway itself, the junction of land routes, and the junction of maritime routes with the Clyde on the other side. So that the proposed development is sitting right in the foreground of these three aspects and will become the focus of those views. And because that's the focus of those views, it's going to be more difficult to discern the details of those three aspects of setting, and the proposed development will be detracting from them. It'll be dominating the landscape, which currently allows us to understand that situation.
Just an interesting point. I mean, you know, we're not going to agree on that. Of course, that's why we're here. And we say that you overstate your case. But you're making the case that you do. Do you say that's the same reaction for all members of society? So, in other words, is that a point that you say might disproportionately affect a Roman academic? Or are you saying that substantial diminution, a significant diminution you talk about, would be equally manifest to a family going up there for a picnic?
I think so.
For all parties.
I would feel that, I've got to say.
Well, the reporter will have to form a view on whether he agrees with that. In terms of your methodology, there are lots of methodological questions which we went through with Ms. Cameron. Don't need to do that. You arrive at a magnitude of impact using the EIA handbook, which you say is moderate, and that's taken from the table, which is on page 184. So just to remind ourselves, the difference is such that this is substantially altered as opposed to such that this is slightly altered. That's the difference, isn't it, between the parties in terms of magnitude of change. I just want to be clear. in arriving at that decision, is that looking at cultural significance as a whole? Because the EIA requirements are that you do. So just to be clear, your finding of a moderate impact, that is on cultural significance as a whole, is it?
Yes, I would be comfortable saying that that is on cultural significance as a whole. And in this particular case, I feel it might be helpful to reiterate that the cultural significance of the monument is to a great degree vested in its setting. What it is as a monument was very specific and very specifically determined by its setting.
You might find that the archaeologists disagree with you, because you know that the excavations, we've got the Newell papers in the documents, the archaeology, the dig was seen to be very important, wasn't it? Telling us about the way that fortlets were constructed and how they related the two periods of occupation and how they related to other military encampments.
Yes, it's an absolutely fascinating excavation and it's a fascinating site, but that doesn't change. It's not an either or question, I don't feel.
Well, it is to this extent. What you appear to be doing is, if I use a non-technical phrase, you're saying that setting main lines into cultural significance. In other words, there's not much difference. If you impact on the setting, then you axiomatically impact on cultural significance. Others may say that actually, if you're looking at cultural significance in the round, there's lots of other good things about this. Archaeology and fabric and associative and all those other things which go into cultural significance. And you are effectively downplaying that, aren't you? Because you need setting, factors of setting, the cultural significance, you need those to loom large in order for an impact on them to get you to where you want to in terms of impact on cultural significance overall.
I don't feel that I have been downplaying the significance of the monument itself. The fabric of the monument, which is of national importance. It is a scheduled monument and it's a most interesting monument. However, we are considering the setting and the impact on the setting.
Well, and I don't want to stop you.
We're considering the setting, and in this particular class of monument, setting is a very significant aspect of cultural significance.
That's why I asked you about the IA methodology. You see, you said that you were of the view that the moderate impact was on cultural significance overall. That's all aspects of it. And there was some suggestion yesterday, I think, in questions from Mr. Milne, that there might be a sort of different approach. But I'm glad that I'm happy with your answer. But in order to get to a point of severity of impact, you need, don't you? You need the reservoir of goodness, if you like, the reservoir of cultural significance to be very largely made up of factors of setting. That's the only way you can get to the degree of harm that you say.
I am not a policy expert. I am an archaeologist. However, I would refer you to PPA-310-2034, which talks about integrity of setting and talks about the fabric of the monument as two issues.
Yeah, we've looked at all of that with Cameron. I've got the answers that deliberately put those questions on paragraph 145 to her. But you undertook an impact analysis. That's your job, and your view, and I think it's very clear, is that a high percentage, a very significant percentage of the overall heritage significance of outer woods is reposed in factors of setting that go to heritage significance. That's your view, isn't it?
It seems to be an either or. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding your question, but there seems to be an either or behind your question, as if there is a sort of, you know, as if there's only a certain amount of cultural significance and a percentage of this is made up by setting or the fabric of the monument.
No. That's why I asked you with respect in coming to your impact, whether or not you were talking about cultural significance overall, not just setting, and you said you did, and you had. So that's the
when I made
entire
that
basket.
assessment, when I made that assessment following the EIA methodology, I did indeed consider cultural significance as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. So that's there's no differentiation. I'm just looking at the logic of what you're saying. I think the factors themselves, I want to spend a little bit of time going through your report, really having a comb through exactly what you say does contribute, and just so that we don't miss anything, because I want to be able to make my submissions comprehensively. So if we could turn to your report.
Mm-hmm.
You've summarized them as being fourfold. So I've got wide arc of view, relationship of the fortlet to the maritime routeways, physical location on the confluence of land routes, and then I've got relation to other monuments. That fourth one you discounted on the basis that that's not going to be affected. Yeah.
I've not considered it further because it was not going to be affected.
Yeah, okay. So those are the three overall factors that you're saying are most affected, but there are other things that you say. So I just want to pick them up. So start with a wide arc of view over the Firth of Clyde. I've got that at page 35, page 48, page 51. So page 35, Firth of Clyde is visible in the wide arc of view. Yeah.
Moment.
It's paragraph 35. It's page 8, paragraph 35. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I was a bit puzzled. I didn't realize I had that many pages.
No, you don't. It was my mistake. It's paragraphs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The Firth of Clyde is visible in a wide arc of view. This is something that we are agreed with the.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, what I want to do is just go through. So I've got a comprehensive list of the factors that you say in various parts of your report. Now, it's clear that you place proportionately more or less weight on those things, and you've had that refining process to come with the three. But I just want to, if you just bear with me, go through all of this. So page 35, Firth of Clyde, and I've got next page 48. It's paragraph 48. Which is open views essential to function of monument in observing and defending maritime landscapes. So views to and from and across or beyond the historic asset or place. Yeah.
So paragraph 48 is the fortlet was also located in relation to maritime features.
Yes. So that's part, isn't it, of the wide arc of view over the Firth of Clyde. I mean, it may be. Is there any difference actually between the wide arc of view over and relationship to the maritime routeways? Are they the same thing?
No.
Why so?
Because a wide arc of view covers the whole open area of the water and the associated coastlines, and specific routeways are the lines of movement across that waterway that are most commonly used or most strategically used.
All right, that's fair. So it's a subset, if you like. That's fine. So you've got paragraph 35, paragraph 48, paragraph 51 then. You've got wide arc of view as a key factor. And 52, western part of this arc of view, particularly sensitive. Yeah. Then a second point, then the relationship to the maritime routeways. There's duplication in a number of places, but I've tried to tease them out. I've got paragraph 46. Monuments providing oversight of the Firth of Clyde, protecting the maritime approach to the western end of the Antonine Wall. Yeah. 48 again. 55. Outer was designed for oversight of and access to both maritime and land routes. Yeah. Separate point then. Morley Glen and Morley as a natural routeway. I've got paragraph 47. Such route should have been factored in determining the location of fortlets. We've looked at paragraph 52. That also mentions the direct route to the eastern shore of the Firth of Clyde. Paragraph 54. Glen Morley runs almost due east to west, providing a quick access from the fortlet to the coast. Yeah.
Yes.
Next factor, north to south ridge on which the fortlet is located. I've got paragraphs 32. Fort located on a knoll on a ridge which runs north to south. 47, I've got outer was at the junction of 3 natural routes.
Yes.
Paragraph 54, I've got ridge on which the fortlet is located provides a natural uninterrupted route northwards between the two valleys.
Yes.
Next factor I've got is Nodsdale stroke Brisbane Glen as a natural routeway. For that, I've got paragraphs 47. I've got 54. Next factor I've got is views to Rothsey and the Carls of Butte. And maybe to speed this up, if you want to just take my word for it, I've got paragraphs 36, 52, and 53.
Yeah. I'm happy to take your word for that.
Evidence for contemporary settlement and landscape. I've got paragraphs 39, 41, 42, 43, and 44, and 45. So basically 39 through 45. And then the final factor is a relationship to the other Roman monuments, and I've got those in 46, 54, and 55. The point of that exercise is that you've gone through your work very carefully to pick out all those factors that you say could contribute to the ability to understand. Some of those have got express references or conclusions in your report about how they contribute to the ability to understand, appreciate, and experience. But you yourself have refined them, haven't you, down to the 4 that you principally say make a difference. The others that you leave kind of behind. So let's take, for instance, Nodsdale, Brisbane, Glen, just as an example. I don't mind which one it is. Having looked at those, do you say well, the contribution to understanding, etc., really isn't very great, and that's the reason it's there. But I don't think that that's got much to say. And is that the reason why you don't carry those forward into your identification of the 4 principal factors?
I considered the routes, the land routes, as one factor. So I didn't leave the Nodsdale Brisbane Glen behind. I described that as the junction of land routes. So Nodsdale Brisbane Glen, Skelmorley, and the Ridge. So that is the typical, typically portlets are located at routes to monitor movement through the landscape. And therefore that junction of routes is the factor in this case.
Okay, so that's helpful. So actually, on that list, it isn't really what you're saying is it's not a case, it's all of those factors, but they are subsets, if you like, of the 4 points that you raise. So in other words, the big point that you make, one of the 4 points you identified was physical location at the confluence of land routes. That actually encompasses all of the land routes. Similarly with the maritime route, that encompasses all of the maritime routes. So in fact, it isn't. 4 is a simplification, if you like. It's not an exercise where you've teased out those that matters and those that don't. It's actually 4 factors, including all of the points that you maintain in your report. Is that right?
Those factors, those 4 factors, are a clarification of the points that I've put forward in the report. And I would argue, for example, that some things, Dr. Carter, in his precognition, identified a point of difference with us, between the two of us, being the importance of the landscape, the current landscape. And that's a paragraph 4.4 in his precognition. And that is, I feel, I identified that as factor in the setting of this monument. However, I didn't feel that it was a factor that contributed directly to the cultural significance of the monument, and therefore it wasn't noted in my paragraph 58. So I wouldn't argue that we're dealing with a conflation of issues at paragraph 58. I would argue that what we're dealing with is an identification of those factors of setting which were specific to the cultural significance of the monument and which contribute most greatly to that cultural significance.
All right. Well, let's just look at landscape character. So current land use and landscape character for a minute then. You deal with that, I think it's your reports 38 to 45. I think the suggestion from Dr. Carter is that overstates our understanding of the landscape and land use, which was contemporary with the portlet and its possible similarity with the current landscape. Is that fair?
No, I don't think it is fair, actually. I think we, in going through this process of assessing the setting, we have to consider the evidence that we have for both the current landscape context and the character of the surrounding landscape as it was, and also relationships with what we know of other features in the landscape, both built and natural. And so I considered the evidence that's present in the historic environment record and in the national record of the historic environment held by Historic Environment Scotland, and the location of other known sites. We know, for example, we have evidence of prehistoric, including Iron Age settlement in the Volta Valleys. We lost the report.
Sorry to interrupt, folks. I think the reporter's dropped out the call. I'll just check with him to see if that's an issue with his internet or something like that.
Thanks, Callum.
David. Just check if you can hear me okay now.
Yes. Yes, we can.
Perfect. And I'll check. David, now that you've rejoined, can you hear and see me okay now? Oh, you won't see me. I've not got my video turned on.
I can certainly hear you. Was that just me, or did that crash for everyone?
I think I've not been made aware of it crashing for anyone else on the system, but seems to be working now. So
Thanks, Callum. Yeah, sorry, it was just closed when you were in mid-sentence there.
What we were dealing with, there was this question of relevance of current land use and landscape character. That's where we were. And what I'll
just tell you where I heard up to, just so you know. I think Dr. McLeod was saying that talking about paragraph 58, and yeah, it was about the contribution of the current landscape to understanding, etc., the setting, and then I think there was something about saying that it's not conflation, and it was at that I think that was mid-sentence, so I don't know where that was going, but that's if you carried on for a bit after me, then that's where I left you.
Okay. Well, let's pick up the question. Let's get to the substance, if you like. There's no evidence, Doctor, that Roman military planners cited this fortlet for reasons relating to the nature of local settlement or land use, is there?
There is a reason to believe that it was cited in relation to pre-existing routes, which are themselves related to Roman period land use and settlement. However, I would draw your attention to the fact that in considering landscape, I concluded that it was not one of the factors that made the greatest contribution to the cultural significance of the monument. And that I feel it is of importance in that the current land use allows it, the monument to be understood, appreciated, and experienced. And the factors of setting that do make a significant contribution to its cultural significance to be understood, appreciated, and experienced.
Okay, so let me just finish my questions, if I may, in that on the topic. So I understand that this didn't carry favour in terms of going forward with the those things which you felt carried more or of more relevance. But the point I was putting to you is that choice of location, the fundamental concern, might have been on some pre-existing routeways, you know, not. But the fundamental concern of the Roman military planners was strategic and regional, and it's those concerns which dictated the general location of the fortlet, isn't it?
I would argue that the setting indicates that the concerns of the Roman military who located that monument were both regional and local. Mm-hmm. And that its location at the junction of land routes provided access to the shore as well as access north has both a local element and a regional element.
Uh-huh. So in terms of the question about contribution, the fact, if I can put it this way, the fact that the current landscape is open and therefore affords panoramic views, which we can all see, that does make a contribution, but that does not stem from specific land uses or any potential similarity to the Roman period landscape, does it?
I feel that the evidence that we have suggests that the use of this landscape as an agricultural landscape with settlement in the valleys is not dissimilar. The evidence we have suggests it's not dissimilar to the Roman period, but that does not make a great contribution to the cultural significance of this particular monument. What it does allow us to do is to appreciate and understand and experience the factors that do make a big cultural significance.
Well, it really doesn't go beyond the fact that it's open, does it? What you're saying is the current land use cover it allows you to see out. That's an end of it, isn't it?
It allows you to see out. It allows you to see locally. It allows you to look towards the far shore.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I. That's
yes,
basically
but you know that's not the point of the questions. Nobody's disputing, of course. Nobody is disputing that you have a wide arc of view, that you can see all manner of things. Of course. The question was put in relation to land use and landscape character. And I'll put the point again, the fact that the current landscape is open and allows you to have those views makes a contribution, but that doesn't stem from specific land uses and any potential similarity to that which would have been there in the Roman period landscape, does it?
It's an agricultural landscape and has been an agricultural landscape for 2,000 years. That is my understanding of that landscape. And whether you could argue that it stems from the Roman use as an agricultural landscape, I don't know. I don't quite understand the issue, I'm afraid. I'm probably being. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. The reasons that thought that was put there, it's really dealing with what you say in paragraphs 38 to 45, and I'll just deal with it one more time, then we'll move on. What you seem to be saying is that there's a relevance to the land use now and an understanding of the landscape and land use which was contemporary with the fortlet. So in other words, a possible similarity with the current landscape. What I'm saying to you is that actually there's no evidence of that. The location for this fortlet, the fundamental concern was for surveillance reasons. It's a functional, strategic, military reason. That is what determined the general location of the fortlet, isn't it?
I would argue that the location of the fortlet is both regionally and locally determined, and that that there are two areas in this question about landscape that need consideration. One is that the evidence that we have from evidence held in the National Record of Historic Environment and in the Historic Environment Records is that there was agricultural settlement in prehistory in these valleys. And that in itself feeds into the question of the fortlet being located at a junction of routes. However, I feel that and this is still an agricultural landscape with settlement in the valley. However, as I have mentioned, I don't feel that the landscape in itself, the current landscape in itself, makes a great contribution to the cultural significance of the monument. What I do feel is that it allows the other setting aspects that do feed into the cultural significance of the monument very greatly to be more clearly understood and appreciated and experienced.
Yeah, and you've got my answer to that. All very good. It's simply because it's open and you can see out. That's I'm not sure we can take it any further than that, Doctor, on that point. Next point, identification then and relevance of Skelmorley Glen as a natural route. I just want to understand, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And going back to your report, we went through the paragraph numbers, but I've got 47, 54, 70, 71, 74, 79, 83, 97. There's quite a lot in there about routaways. When you're talking about Skelmorley Glen, are you talking about the ravine itself, or are you talking about an exit sort of more broadly in that direction over the site? Just want to, because in terms of reference to the questions you were being asked by Mr. Milne in chief, I wanted to make sure that we were talking about the same thing.
The Skelmorley Glen extends for some distance from the site. down towards the shore. Would it be helpful if we found a map to look at rather than to discuss?
Not for me. I've been. I don't need to know if the reporter's been. But what Dr. Carter is saying is that the actual glen itself, he's talking about the narrow, steep-sided ravine. So in his terms, what he's saying is, look, that glen is a narrow, steep-sided ravine. There's a fast-flowing stream in there. And really, anybody needing to travel to and from the shore is not going to use that route, particularly if you're on a horse. What you do is you'd seek out a gentler route. So you might start off, and that's why I wanted to understand the terms of reference. You might start out towards the glen in that direction, but then you're going to go somewhere else to actually get down to the shore. Or are we actually talking about the ravine itself?
I think we should, in this case, probably try and find a map to refer.
Sure, if you want to do that, yeah.
Because I would like you to clarify which area you feel is a ravine. If you wouldn't mind, that would be very helpful. Let's see. Can I refer you to? Is this going to be easiest?
So I've got figure 9.2 from the EIAR. That's where
9.2 from the EIAR. Can you remind me which document that is? Document number?
that's CD002 figure 9.2.
Oh, I'm sorry, I am struggling to find that at the moment.
Right.
Yes, sorry, I missed the document reference, Mr. Hardy. Which document?
So I'm looking in the EIAR figure 9.2, which is the plan showing the heritage assets within the 1 kilometre study area. It's an OS.
What page number is that? Sorry, I just.
That is a good.
The documents are saved obviously as different. It might probably just me, Mr. Hardy, but the documents are saved in batches.
I've got that in. I've got a hard copy, is what I'm looking at. I'll be honest, but. I don't know whether it's as quick enough to actually do this. It's a slightly sort of Heath Robinson way of doing it, but I don't know whether you can see that.
Not sufficiently to read the topography, I'm afraid.
Right. Okay.
However, I have to say, I wonder if it might help actually to have a look at the wireframes. Would that be any help to actually
No,
look
I
at
don't think
contour?
so. I think, for my point, it's the ordnance.
Yeah, I'm looking at a different map, but it probably doesn't matter because as long as we're all looking at the ordnance
Exactly,
survey
it's an
map,
ordnance
then
survey basis. What all I want.
we all just find something with the ordnance survey baseline on it. It looks like
So the SCI volume 2 has got various figures on it as well, but anywhere with the OS base. That's 005. But I mean, the point you wanted to go to a map. The point I'm simply making, Doctor, is that if you are on the site and then you were to head pretty much due west down to Meagle. That's what that is exactly what I have described. That is the narrow, steep-sided ravine with a fast-flowing stream in it. And it's there today. And that, if you've been, that's what you get.
I feel that, I mean, we have used the Skelmorley Glen to access the site. And I wonder if your definition of what the Glen consists of is perhaps a little narrow, but
I'm looking at, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm looking at what the Ordnance Survey map identifies as Skelmorley Glen. It says it on the map. That's the very steep contours, the ravine, and the water. That's, we're not doing it. That is Skelmorley Glen.
I'm sorry, I don't have an access to a map here that is sufficient detail to read.
I
apologise.
I wonder. I'm after much searching. Sorry to interrupt during cross, but I have found an OS map which will probably serve the function. Others may have beaten me to it. It's in CD 001.005.
Yes, that's
page.
That's
maybe
fine,
where you've been for the past 5 minutes, Mr. Hardy, and
what's that?
Page 2 of the PDF. You may have been at this very map for the past few minutes, but it's page 2 of the PDF. And if you
I've just got my hard copy here, Mr. Milne. That's all I'm looking at. That's the.
That would have saved time. But yes, I would suggest, if I mean, that Dr. McLeod-Rivet could just zoom into that map. It remains clear, quite significantly zoomed in.
Thank you so much. That's a great help.
So just to get back to sort of question and answering, I had put to you about the Skelmorley Glen, the inaccessibility of that. I suggested the description: narrow, steep-sided ravine, fast-flowing stream, and so on. You then said, "Well, could you take me on the map?" I'm taking you on the map. Ordnance Survey marks Skelmorley Glen. You can see that on the OS, which then goes due west from the site down towards Meagle and Skelmorley Bridge. That's the Glen, isn't it?
That is the Glen, and I am quite happy with that as a routeway. I do not see that as an impassable ravine. The slopes of the hills either side, if you're looking at the area that is identified as Skelmorley Water on that map, and is currently shown as being wooded, I'm quite happy that you could take a horse or go on foot down either the wooded area of that map or along the slopes just beside it.
Well, Skelmorley Water's off to the east, isn't it? I mean, as it's labelled here, I think it's only kind of names on, its names on a map. But Skelmorley Glen, further to the west, if you look at the contours, and if you've been, gets steeper and more difficult. And I mean, impassable is not the test. I'm suggesting that you can climb Mount Everest if you want to. But the point is that Dr. Carter is saying is that if that route, particularly if you're on horseback, that common sense, you're not going to go down there. You're going to seek out gentler slopes to the north or south. That's his view.
But even if you're searching out gentler slopes on the north or the south slope of that glen, that is still a routeway.
All right. It's about, these things are nuances, aren't they? It's about the amount of weight. What we're doing is looking at why we have slight, why you have moderate. There's no silver bullets. It's all shades. It's all nuancing. Dr. Carter's point is simply that it's not common sense to think or to place too much weight on Skelmorley Glen because it's too steep. And that point goes no further than that, does it? You seem to be standing by that, and therefore you think there's more weight attaching to Skelmorley Glen as a route. That's the difference between us, isn't it? Right.
I just want to for clarification, I guess when I'd been understanding the term Skelmery Glen as not to mean the little bit of the valley where it says Skelmery Glen in the map, but the glen meaning the root of the burn and the sides of the valley. So I was thinking of the glen as being 3 or 4 kilometres in length and perhaps 500 or 600 metres wide, as being the valley with the river at the bottom, not a very narrow or very short passageway itself. Now, if people are meaning something different by the term Skelmery Glen, then you can tell me that in the closing submissions. But I assumed a more common sense, or not common sense, but everyday usage of the word glen.
I think it's worth the question, and that, in a sense, is why I asked, because I wanted to make sure that we weren't talking at cross purposes. All I can say is that when Dr. Carter was talking about Skelmery Glen, he was talking about it in quite a narrow view, and what he was saying was that you aren't going to go down that precipitous bit, the narrow steep side ravine. You are more likely to go north and south. Where that takes you, I think, so is no more than he says that you should place, slightly less weight on that in terms of importance. I hope that's helpful. I can't really take it much further. Next point then, importance of views towards Rothsay Harbour and the Cars of Butte. And this is in that large arc of viewpoint, isn't it? The relevant paragraph references in your report 53, 69, 82. I think what you do, Doctor, is you place particular emphasis on that part of the panoramic view directed towards Rothsay and the Cars of Butte, because in terms of original function, you say that is one of the factors that is key to understanding and appreciating and experiencing the faultlet today, don't you? That's something you single out.
Yes.
The point between us and what Dr. Carter has to say is that the implication that the faultlet was cited specifically to observe movement in that part of the seascape is a bit of a stretch, isn't it, in terms of Roman military strategy, and it goes beyond the evidence before this reporter. Of course, it's a panoramic view. Yes, you can see everything, but the idea that within that there's an archy view which is somehow more intensely interesting is not borne out by the evidence.
I didn't say that one was more interesting than the other. Mm-hmm. I think they are two different factors of setting. And you forgive me if I misunderstand, but you seem to see that the idea of maritime routes as a sub-factor in a wider arc of view, whereas I'm thinking about it more. Yes, I'm thinking about those as specific routeways across the water and within the water, and so as a separate factor of setting.
Right. So the point between us, Dr. Carter says, look, and I think you accept this, but Rothsay, what became the port of Rothsay was much later, wasn't it? That was in the medieval period. There's no evidence that was important as at an earlier stage.
I used Rothsay as a place name to indicate the area I was looking at. I'm not suggesting whether there was or wasn't a settlement at Rothsay at this period. I'm afraid I don't know.
I think you said it was a place marker, didn't you, just to orient people on the map. So is it no more than the general point that you point people in that direction, but it's an understanding of surveillance over maritime routes? Is that's where it goes?
I think this is an important specific maritime route into the Cars of Butte, because if you follow that through, then there is access to deep sea lochs and coastal passages which stretch up and down the west coast of Scotland and out further towards the west. And these are largely hidden from the Romans, and they are in areas which are not under the control of the Romans. So I think that the junction of a routeway like that and the Clyde, which this fortlet is constructed to overlook and monitor, is a clear strategic consideration. And I'm thinking of maritime routes a bit like roads in a landscape. So you could potentially argue that your arc of view is like a dry land landscape. Whereas the routes that we are looking at, specific strategic routes, are more like roads.
All right. I'm just looking at my notes. I think I'm pretty much there, Doctor. What I've done is put there's a lot of overlap in these points, but I identified the differences between us, I think, on the factors. Ultimately, they're for the report, aren't they? You've got two sets of professional, well, actually three sets of professional view, because you've got AOC, you've got Headland, and then you've got HES. Relationship to other monuments we don't need to deal with. If you just give me a second, I'm just going to ask my consultants whether there's anything else I need to put. One matter just to explore with you in relation to static surveillance as opposed to kind of staging posts or places from which surveillance would take place out from the fortlet. What's your take on that? There's clearly what the academic literature tells us is that this is a very different setup from the western end of Hadrian's Wall, and I think that's clear. And I just want to know what you think about that, whether or not you think it was principally a static surveillance point or whether it was actually a barracks for people to go out.
I don't think it has to be either or. Again, I think this is a rather binary approach to the monument. It seems very clear to me from its setting that this was a monument which both had static monitoring and an active movement in the landscape role. And indeed, even on the Hadrian's Wall fortlets, most fortlets have evidence that people were moving to and fro between them. They're patrolling, carrying messages, all that kind of thing. And I think that it's very clear that by the time that they came to construct these defences for the western end of the Antonine Wall, fortlets were being used in a highly flexible way as very functional structures to monitor, control, patrol, as a sort of multifunctional tool in the landscape for security.
So there isn't, that's absolutely correct, you're not going to use a fortlet in any prescribed way and no other. But to that extent, you're not saying to the reporter that, well, all of the importance or all of the heritage interest is because these were static viewpoints. You're not going that far. You're saying that these are mixed. There'd have been some and others. What we can agree is that they weren't the mile apart castles that you get on Hadrian's Wall. Things had moved on, hadn't they? And I think what Dr. Carter had said, they'd learned lessons. They'd learned lessons from further south.
Yes, that's very, very clear. And you know, I think this goes back to our discussion of routes in the landscape, in the local landscape. That it's the location of the monument at a junction of land routes emphasizes the fact that it is both mobile and the location of the monument with its specific sightlines and panoramic view emphasize its monitoring role. So I think it's very clear. I think the setting of the monument helps the understanding and appreciation and experience of the monument as a multifunctional monument, as a fortlet in its setting.
Yeah, and what lies between us is the decision to be made whether and to what extent the turbines result in a slight diminution of that, a slight impact on that, or a moderate impact, as you say. And ultimately, that's the difference between us. That's professional judgment, and the reporter will form his view. So I've got no further questions for you. Thank you very much, Doctor. That's across the examination.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardy. Mr. Milne, I'll go back to you. It's 1:20. Doctor, yeah. I'm not sure how long do we think the examination might take. We might prefer to press on rather than stop. I suppose it depends how long you think.
Yeah, I've got nothing to ask.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, well, therefore, Dr. MacLeod-Rivet, thank you very much for your evidence, and thanks to everyone. Before we close, the one thing I mentioned at the start yesterday was my intention, which I still have, to go back to the site of the fort. I think that will be helpful. We weren't there for long the other day, and it would just be helpful for me to do that, having heard this over the last 2 days. I still think I can do that on my own, but I just want to give Mr. Milne and Mr. Hardy the chance to, if they've got a view, if they think it should be accompanied again, then let me know and I can think about it.
I think we're quite happy for you to go on your own. You know what you know where it is. You know what you're looking for. So we're happy.
Yes, we're happy to serve for unaccompanied site visit.
That's fine. All I'll do is just let Mr. Scott know what day I'm likely to do it, just so he's aware. Okay, so unless there are any other points, then I think I'll thank everyone again for the participation, and I'll bring the inquiry to a close.
So it's just
you snap closing submissions.
Oh, I do beg your pardon. So, Mr. Milne, you mentioned closing submissions. Is that what you were also going to raise, Mr. Hardy?
That, and also the visualization, just to make sure that if there were any problems with you seeing that you got hold of it.
Right. Yes. Let me just check. I've seen an email that came in earlier on. So we seem to have got them. I think there's just a question of getting them uploaded and published. So that seems straightforward. I'll let you know if there's a problem.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So yes, my apologies. Closing submissions. So as I say, and particularly since we've had further written submissions on policy, the council's not been involved in this section. I think the closing submissions that I think I'd find most helpful are going to be ones related to what we've been discussing over the last 2 days. And then, of course, there are policy dimensions to that. That's fine. So, from HES's point of view, Mr. Milne, when do you think you'd be in a position to be able to pull those together? Firstly,
if I may have 1 second just to check that what I'm about to suggest meets with favour with Historic Environment Scotland. Or for Historic Environment Scotland, a week on Friday. The only caveat to that would be if the appellant Well, I assume the appellant will not introduce new evidence in respect of exceptional circumstances. But if that's developed in a way which comes as a surprise to Historic Scotland, then we may want to consider what's said. I appreciate the appellant gets the last word.
So assuming there isn't any new evidence, but maybe just a clarification of the position, then so that weekend Friday for you, that's the 24th, is it? Okay, I said pull together, which is a bit pejorative. Carefully craft is perhaps what I should have said. Mr. Hardy, if you've cited those on the 24th, then from your perspective, how long before you'd be in a position to respond?
Well, I can say practically, I'm in another inquiry, so it's not going to make that much difference to me. I would have thought a week. I mean, a week. If HF has got a week, I won't be. Just to allow some latitude, I won't be working on them for the week because I'm going to be elsewhere.
Okay.
So is that the 20? Is that the 30?
The 1st of July, wouldn't it? It would
The
be
1st of July.
The 24th for EGS and 1st of July for the.
It would help me, and I'm not trying to take advantage, but just I'm practically not going to be able to look, and that Mr. Mill knows where I am in that week, so because he's involved in that other inquiry. So I wonder whether I could just beg the weekend of that, just so I can actually look at these if they need to be. So that's the 20. Would that be the 4th? Is it the first, second, third, Monday the 4th? That would just allow me to have some time at home to work on these specifically.
Yeah, no, that's that. Of course, that's fine for me. Okay, so we've got the
Monday the 4th,
the 24th, and then the 4th.
Thank you very much.
Try and work. Okay. If that's all, then thank you everyone for taking part. And
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.